This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've never really talked about this before, but I need to get it off my chest. It happened when I was in 4th grade back in the Philippines at this school that had both elementary and high school sections in the same compound. I'm 29 now, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It was supposed to be just another hot, ordinary day. The morning started like any other. Our teacher, Miss Santos, was in the middle of our English lesson when there was a knock at the classroom door. I remember I was doodling in my notebook instead of paying attention when the school secretary came in. She looked worried, whispering something to Ms. Santos that made her face go pale. When Ms. Santos turned back to face us, something was wrong. Her eyes were wide and her hands were shaking a little. "Class, we need to pack up our things," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Be very quiet, don't make any noise. We're leaving the building." We were confused, obviously. Some kids started asking questions, but she just shushed them and kept repeating, "Pack quietly, no loud noises." She seemed genuinely scared, and that's what freaked me out the most. Teachers aren't supposed to be afraid of anything, right? I still remember the eerie silence as we lined up. Usually there'd be the distant sounds of other classes, kids laughing in the hallways, or someone playing basketball in the court outside. But that day, nothing. Just the shuffling of our feet and the occasional cough. Ms. Santos made us hold hands in a line, like kindergartners. I held onto Jenny's sweaty palm in front of me and felt Marco's tight grip behind me. Walking through the hallway, I noticed other classes doing the same thing. Lines of confused kids being led out by teachers who looked like they'd seen ghosts. Nobody was telling us what was happening. That's the thing about being a kid in the Philippines. Adults rarely explain scary things to you. As we approached the open canteen area that separated the elementary building from the high school section, I saw something I'll never forget. There were maybe 12 or 15 high school students lying on the ground on towels and mats. Some looked unconscious, just lying there with their eyes closed. Others were thrashing around, screaming things I couldn't understand. What scared me most were the ones who had teachers holding them down. One girl, she must have been around 16, was being restrained by 3 male teachers. She was screaming in a voice that didn't sound like her own, deep and guttural. Her eyes were rolled back, showing only the whites. She was clawing at her own face, leaving bloody scratch marks, and the teachers were struggling to hold her wrists. A boy nearby was convulsing, his back arching unnaturally, foam coming from his mouth. I remember thinking it looked like he was being electrocuted, but there were no wires anywhere near him. I tried to stop walking to see what was happening, but Ms. Santos pushed me forward. "Don't look, Victor. Keep moving." But I'd already seen enough. Some of the affected students were speaking in languages I'd never heard before. Others were laughing hysterically, then suddenly crying. One girl was banging her head against the concrete floor until a teacher placed a folded jacket underneath. The smell hit me too. It was like a mix of sweat, vomit, and something else, something rotten, like meat left out in the sun too long. I started feeling dizzy, and Marco behind me was crying silently. When we reached the main gate, there was a priest standing there, Father Reyes from the local parish. He was dressed in his full priestly garments, holding a small container of holy water. As each student passed through the gate, he sprinkled us with the water, making the sign of the cross and muttering prayers. Some drops landed on my forehead and arm. It was cool against my skin, which was burning hot from fear and the midday heat. Outside, parents were already gathering, looking panicked. My dad wasn't there yet. He worked an hour away in Manila, so I stood with the other kids whose parents hadn't arrived. I overheard teachers talking in hushed voices, using words like mass hysteria and possession. When my dad finally picked me up, he tried to act casual, asking about my day like nothing had happened, but I could see he was worried. The next morning, we got a call from school saying classes were suspended for a week. No explanation given. I couldn't sleep for days. I kept seeing that high school girl's face, her eyes rolled back, scratching herself. I heard her unnatural voice in my dreams. My dad must have noticed something was wrong with me. After 3 days of me barely eating and jumping at every noise, he decided to take me back to the school to get some answers. I didn't want to go, but he insisted it would help me understand there was nothing to be afraid of. The campus was empty except for a few staff members and, strangely, some construction workers. They were working near the big acacia tree in the center of the school grounds, the one we were always told not to play around because it was special to the spirits. I always thought that was just something adults said to keep us from climbing it. My dad talked to Mr. Bautista, the school principal, while I sat outside his office. I couldn't hear everything, but some parts were clear enough. Apparently, the school had started construction on a new building a few weeks earlier. When the workers dug the foundation, they found human bones. The school had been built over an old cemetery, not a proper one with headstones and plots, but a mass grave from either World War II or some older conflict. They weren't sure. The construction disturbed whatever or whoever was buried there. On the day of the incident, students in different high school classrooms started acting strangely at the same time. Some fainted, others began speaking in different voices. One of the students, a senior named Carlo, became completely possessed by what the teachers described as the spirit of someone whose bones had been disturbed. Carlo, speaking in this other voice, made demands. He said the spirits wanted offerings or they would curse all the children in the school. They wanted food, candles, flowers, and specifically a native chicken, the black kind used in traditional rituals, cooked a certain way and offered near the acacia tree. Mr. Bautista explained they'd brought in the priest, a local albulario, traditional healer, and even respected elders from the nearby barangay who knew about these things. They all agreed the school needed to make the offerings and properly rebury the bones that had been found. When my dad and I left the principal's office, we saw workers carefully placing bones into small wooden boxes near the acacia tree. There were offerings around the base of the tree, food, flowers, candles, and what looked like the remains of a burned black chicken. The air smelled of incense and something else, something earthy and old. My dad tried to explain it all away on our drive home. He said sometimes people get so scared they convince themselves something supernatural is happening. He talked about mass hysteria and how teenagers are impressionable, but I saw his hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. He kept checking the rearview mirror like he thought something might be following us. School reopened the next week. Things seemed normal again. The high school students who had been affected didn't talk about what happened, or at least not to us elementary kids. The construction of the new building continued, but in a different location. The wooden boxes with the bones disappeared, but things weren't the same for me. I noticed the teachers had moved morning assembly away from the acacia tree. No one played near it anymore. Sometimes when walking past the tree alone, I'd feel a cold spot, even on the hottest days. Once, I swear I heard whispering coming from its branches when there was no wind. The worst was when I'd see Carlo, the senior who had been possessed. He looked different somehow, older than his years. His eyes would sometimes catch mine in the hallway or canteen, and he'd give me this strange look, like he knew something I didn't. Once, he walked past me and whispered, "They remember you, Victor." I never told anyone about that. I finished 4th grade at that school, but I never went back to my father's province after that. I convinced my parents to let me live with my mom in the city and attend school there instead. I told them it was because the city school was better, but really I couldn't stand being near that acacia tree or seeing Carlo in the hallways. To this day, I can't explain what happened. Was it mass hysteria? Some kind of gas leak that made everyone hallucinate? Or did the construction really disturb something that should have been left alone? I don't know. But sometimes when I'm half asleep, I still hear that unnatural voice from the canteen, and I still feel those cold spots on hot days, even though I'm thousands of miles away now. I've never been back to the Philippines since moving to the States after college. My cousins tell me the school is still there, bigger now with new buildings. The acacia tree remains, larger than ever, and every year, they say, the school holds a special mass at the beginning of the term. No one talks about why, but there's always food left at the base of that tree afterward. Story 2. I've been a truck driver for almost 15 years now, hauling everything from furniture to machinery across the country. You see a lot of strange things on the road when you drive as much as I do, especially at night. But what happened to me last October on Route 50 in West Virginia, I still can't explain it. I still get chills thinking about it. I was making a steel beam delivery from Charleston to a construction site near Pittsburgh. It was a cold night, maybe 35 degrees, and I remember the moon was full and bright enough to cast shadows across the road. The route through West Virginia is mostly empty, just miles of forest and the occasional small town. Most truckers I know hate driving through there at night because of how isolated it feels, but I'd always found it peaceful. That night, I'd been driving since around 6 in the evening. It was a little after 3 in the morning, 3:07 according to my dashboard clock, when I came around this bend on Route 50, about 40 miles east of Clarksburg. The road was completely empty, which wasn't unusual for that time. My high beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the yellow lines and the wall of trees on both sides. That's when I spotted her. She was standing on the shoulder, right arm extended, thumb out. A hitchhiker, a woman, just standing there in the middle of nowhere, miles from any town or house. She was wearing this thin white dress that looked like a nightgown, completely inappropriate for the cold October night. Her hair was long and dark, all tangled like she'd been out in the wind for hours. I remember thinking immediately that something wasn't right. Who the hell hitchhikes at 3 in the morning on a deserted highway and dressed like that in the cold? But as my headlights fully hit her, I saw her face clearly for a second. She looked desperate, sad maybe, not threatening, just lost. Against my better judgment, I slowed down. In 15 years of driving, I've never picked up a hitchhiker, too dangerous these days. But something about her made me pull over. Maybe it was the thought of leaving someone out there in the cold. Maybe it was the emptiness of the road and knowing there wouldn't be another car for hours. Whatever it was, I stopped about 20 feet ahead of her. I watched in my side mirror as she walked toward my truck. Her movements were off somehow. Not drunk or high, just awkward, like someone who hadn't walked in a while. When she got to the passenger door, I leaned over and opened it for her. That's when I noticed the smell. As soon as the door opened, this overpowering odor hit me, like wet soil and something rotting underneath, like an open grave. It was so strong I almost gagged. "Where you headed?" I asked as she climbed in. She didn't answer right away, just settled into the seat and stared straight ahead. Up close, her skin was pale, not just white but almost gray, and her eyes, they were so dark and hollow, like there was nothing behind them, no light, no life. "Just up the road," she finally said. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but somehow it filled the entire cab. It had this strange echo to it, like she was talking from the bottom of a well. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway. The silence in the cab was uncomfortable. I tried to make conversation, asked if she lived nearby, if someone had left her stranded, if she needed to use my phone to call someone. She just kept staring straight ahead, occasionally glancing over at me with those empty eyes. After about 10 minutes of driving, the temperature in the cab started dropping rapidly. My truck has a good heating system, but suddenly it felt like the AC was on full blast. I could see my breath fogging in front of me, even though the temperature gauge on the dashboard still read 72 degrees. "You cold?" I asked her, reaching to turn up the heat even more. She turned to look at me then, really look at me for the first time. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked. Her question caught me off guard. "What?" "Ghosts," she repeated. "Do you believe people can come back after they're gone?" I remember feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "I don't know," I said. "Never really thought about it." She nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something for her. "I think they can," she said. "I think sometimes when something terrible happens, a part of you gets stuck, and you just keep doing the same thing over and over, hoping for a different outcome." I glanced away from the road for a second to look at her. That's when I noticed the window behind her. In the glass, I could see her reflection. but it didn't match what was happening in the seat next to me. While she was sitting down, her reflection was standing up, looming over me. In the reflection, her face was different too, more sunken, her mouth hanging open slightly, her eyes completely black. I jerked my eyes back to the road, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself I was just tired, that my eyes were playing tricks on me after driving for so many hours. But when I looked back at the window, her reflection was still standing, even though she was sitting right next to me. That's when she started humming, this soft, eerie melody that I'd never heard before but somehow felt familiar, like a lullaby but distorted. I couldn't take it anymore. I hit the brakes hard, the truck skidding slightly on the asphalt. We came to a stop right in the middle of the highway, not that there was any other traffic to worry about. "Look," I said, turning to face her, "I need to know what's going on." But the passenger seat was empty, just empty, like she'd never been there at all. I sat there for a moment, stunned, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. The cab still smelled like damp earth, and it was still freezing cold. I got out and walked around the truck, thinking maybe she'd somehow gotten out without me noticing. But the passenger door was still closed and locked from the inside, and there was nowhere she could have gone, just empty highway stretching in both directions and dense forest on either side. I climbed back into the truck, turned the heat all the way up, and drove. I didn't stop, didn't slow down, just kept the accelerator pressed to the floor until I reached the truck stop in Clarksburg. The place was mostly empty when I arrived, just a couple of other trucks in the lot and a waitress behind the counter inside. She looked up when I came in, took one look at my face, and poured me a cup of coffee without asking. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said as she slid the mug across to me. I laughed, but it came out sounding more like a sob. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." She leaned on the counter, this knowing look in her eyes. "Try me." So I told her. About the woman in the white dress, the smell, the reflection in the window, how she'd disappeared from a moving truck. As I talked, the waitress's expression never changed. She didn't look skeptical or amused, just sad, almost resigned. When I finished, she sighed and refilled my coffee. "You're not the first," she said quietly. "Been happening for years, always on that same stretch of Route 50, always late at night." "What do you mean?" I asked. "There was an accident there back in 1987, she explained. Young woman driving home from her night shift at the hospital in Parkersburg. Car went off the road down an embankment. They didn't find her for 3 days. I felt sick. And people see her, picking her up?" The waitress nodded. "Truckers, mostly. Not everyone stops for her, but those who do, well, they all tell pretty much the same story you just told me." "Who is she?" I asked. "What does she want?" Her name was Sarah Campbell, 24 years old. They say she was just a few miles from home when it happened. Maybe that's what she wants. To get home. I stayed at that truck stop until sunrise, drinking coffee and trying to make sense of what had happened. When I finally left, I took a different route to Pittsburgh, adding nearly 2 hours to my drive just to avoid going back on Route 50. That was 6 months ago. I've never driven that stretch of road again, and I never will. I've requested different routes, made up excuses, even called in sick a couple of times when my dispatcher tried to send me that way. I still drive at night sometimes. It's part of the job, but it's different now. I keep the radio louder, drink more coffee, do whatever I can to stay alert and distracted, and I never, ever pick up hitchhikers. The worst part is the dreams. At least once a week I dream about her standing on the side of the road, her arm outstretched, those hollow eyes staring at me as I drive past. Sometimes in the dreams, I don't stop. I just keep driving, watching her shrink in my rearview mirror. But other times, I do stop. And in those dreams, when she gets in, she turns to me and says, "Take me home." And somehow, in the dream, I know exactly where she wants to go, even though she never tells me. I've looked up the accident since then. Sarah Campbell was real. She died on Route 50 in 1987, just like the waitress said. Her car went off the road on a night very similar to the one when I saw her. Cold, clear, full moon. They found her still strapped into her seat, but the article mentioned that her body was in an unusual position, whatever that means. I don't know if what I experienced was really her ghost. I don't know if I believe in ghosts at all, but I know what I saw, what I smelled, what I felt in that truck cab. And I know that whatever it wasn't natural and it wasn't right. So if you're ever driving through West Virginia late at night and you see a woman in a white dress standing on the side of Route 50 with her thumb out, just keep driving, don't slow down, don't make eye contact, and whatever you do, don't let her in, because once she's there, even if she disappears, she never really leaves you. Story 3. I've kept this story to myself for almost 3 years now. Even typing this makes my hands shake. I'm not looking for anyone to believe me. Hell, I don't know if I'd believe it either if someone told me, but I need to get this off my chest because it's eating me alive. I've been driving big rigs for 22 years. Started when I was 24, right after my failed attempt at community college. The open road suited me better than textbooks ever did. I've seen pretty much everything you can imagine on America's highways. Accidents, weird roadkill, lot lizards, the works, but nothing, and I mean nothing, comes close to what happened that night on Highway 97. It was mid-October 3 years ago. I was hauling a load of electronics from Sacramento to Seattle. Mostly new gaming systems and laptops for the holiday season. Good paying load, tight schedule. I'd been pushing hard all day, trying to make up time after getting delayed at a way station in Northern California. By midnight, I was somewhere in Central Oregon on Highway 97. Hadn't seen another vehicle for at least 2 hours. Just me, my headlights, and miles of pitch black forest on either side. My eyes were getting heavy. You know how it is when you've been staring at the white lines too long. They start to dance, and your eyelids feel like they've got weights attached. I remember checking my GPS. The next proper truck stop was about 90 miles ahead. Too far in my condition. I was seriously considering pulling onto the shoulder for a quick nap when I saw a sign. Last stop truckers, 5 miles. Simple white text on a blue background. Nothing fancy. I'd never noticed it before, but I wasn't about to question my luck. 5 miles later I saw the place, just a small cluster of lights off to the right. As I flipped my blinker and turned in, something felt off. Can't explain it exactly, but it was like that feeling when you walk into your house and somehow know someone's been there while you were gone. The lot was bigger than it looked from the highway. 7 or 8 trucks were parked in various spots, but no cars. Not unusual for a trucker-focused stop, but still eerily empty for a place advertising itself as the last stop for miles. My headlights swept across the parked rigs as I pulled in, and that's when I noticed the dust. Thick, gray dust coating every single one of them. Not road dust, more like the kind that settles when something hasn't been moved in weeks. I parked near the entrance, away from the other trucks, cut the engine and sat there for a minute, just listening. Nothing but the tick of my cooling engine and the faint hum of the lot's floodlights. There was a small diner attached to what looked like a convenience store. The sign said 24 hours, but the windows were dark. Only light was coming from a dead neon open sign hanging crookedly in the window. I should have left right then, should have started my rig and gotten the hell out of there, but I was exhausted, and my bladder was about to burst after 3 straight hours of coffee and energy drinks. As I climbed down from my cab, the cold hit me like a slap. Must have been around 30 degrees, but it felt colder somehow. Damp, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. I zipped my jacket up to my chin and headed for the entrance. That's when I heard it. Voices. Not loud, just a faint whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Like when you're in a restaurant and can hear the murmur of conversation but can't make out the words. I stopped, looked around. Nothing moved in the parking lot. The whispers faded. I figured it was just the wind in the trees beyond the lot, or maybe my tired brain playing tricks. Happens to all of us truckers when we push too hard. The door to the diner was unlocked. I pushed it open, and a little bell chimed above my head. The sound was jarring in the silence. Inside, it was dim but not completely dark. Emergency lights cast a sickly green glow over everything. And what I saw, Jesus. It looked like everyone had just vanished in the middle of their meals. There were maybe 10 tables, most of them occupied with plates of half-eaten food, burgers with single bites taken out, fries gone cold, coffee cups still half full, but no people. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded muffled, like the air was too thick. No answer, but the whispers started again, faint, unintelligible, coming from somewhere in the back, maybe the kitchen. I should have left. I know that now. But curiosity is a powerful thing when mixed with exhaustion. I convinced myself there must be a reasonable explanation. Power outage, maybe. Staff and customers huddled in the back with flashlights or something. I moved deeper into the diner, past the abandoned tables. The whispers grew slightly louder, but still indistinct. That's when I noticed someone sitting in the farthest booth, back to me. Just the top of a baseball cap and shoulders in a trucker jacket visible above the seat. "Hey, buddy," I called out. "What's going on here? Where is everyone?" No response, no movement, just those constant, maddening whispers from everywhere and nowhere. I approached slowly, relief mixing with caution. At least I wasn't alone. As I got closer, I could see the guy was hunched over, perfectly still, too still. "You okay, man?" I asked, now just a few feet away. That's when I saw it, the reflection in the window next to the booth. It was dark outside, the window acting like a mirror against the diner's dim emergency lights. In the reflection, I could see the booth clearly. I could see myself standing there, and I could see him. But in the reflection, he wasn't sitting. In the reflection, he was standing, pressed against the glass. His face, God, his face was distorted, mouth stretched impossibly wide in a silent scream, eyes bulging, staring directly at me in the reflection. But the actual person in the booth hadn't moved an inch. I stumbled backward, knocking into a table, sending cups and plates crashing to the floor. The whispers suddenly grew louder, no longer unintelligible. They were saying my name, over and over. "Mike, Mike, Mike." I ran. Didn't look back, didn't think, just ran for the door. As I reached it, the whispers became a roar, like standing next to a jet engine. The emergency lights flickered wildly. I yanked the door open and burst outside, gulping the cold night air like I'd been drowning. The parking lot had changed. Every truck now had someone sitting behind the wheel, shadowy figures, barely visible through dust-covered windows, but I could feel them watching me, all of them. I sprinted to my rig, hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before managing to unlock the door. As I climbed in, I glanced back at the diner. Figures stood at every window now, their faces pressed against the glass, just like in the reflection, their mouths moving in perfect unison, still whispering my name. I fired up the engine and peeled out of there, tires squealing. In my mirrors, I watched as every truck in the lot suddenly turned on their headlights, illuminating the parking area in harsh white light. But none of them moved to follow me. I drove 90 miles without stopping, hands locked on the wheel, eyes wide open despite my exhaustion. Didn't see another vehicle the entire time. When I finally reached a real truck stop, bright lights, cars in the lot, people visible through the windows, I nearly wept with relief. I parked and went inside, ordered coffee with shaking hands. The waitress must have seen something in my face because she asked if I was okay. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. "Rough night?" she asked. "Yeah," I managed. "Hey, what's that truck stop about 90 miles south of here, the one on 97? She frowned. "There's nothing between here and Bend except Gorman's place. But that's just a gas station, no restaurant. Closes at 10 anyway." The next morning, after a fitful sleep in my cab, I checked my map. There was nothing where that truck stop should have been. Just a long, empty stretch of Highway 97 cutting through dense forest. I even checked my GPS history. According to the device, I'd never exited the highway at all that night. Over the next few weeks, I cautiously asked other truckers if they knew about any unmarked stops on that stretch of 97. Most just shook their heads, but a few, always the older guys, the ones with thousands of miles in their eyes, would get real quiet. One finally told me about ghost stops, places that supposedly only appear to truckers who've been on the road too long, who are too tired to distinguish between reality and hallucination. They find you when you're vulnerable, he said, when you're alone and exhausted, places that shouldn't exist, filled with people who aren't really there. You're lucky you got out, some don't. I didn't believe in ghosts before that night, still don't know what to believe now, but I've changed my routes to avoid Highway 97 completely. I never drive past sunset if I can help it, and I never ever stop at unfamiliar places when I'm alone on the road. The whispers haven't completely gone away. Sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep in my cab, I hear them again, faint, distant, but unmistakable, calling my name, waiting for me to answer. And sometimes in the rearview mirror, just for a split second before I can look away, I see them, faces pressed against the glass, watching, always watching. Story 4. So I'm 27, and I've always known my parents' house was haunted. We all have. It wasn't something we talked about with outsiders because, well, who wants to be the weird family who claims they live with ghosts? But between us, it was just a fact of life. Growing up there meant getting used to the occasional shadow darting across your peripheral vision, hearing whispers when nobody was around, or walking into the bathroom to find the faucet running when nobody had been in there for hours. I moved out when I was 22, and honestly, I didn't miss those aspects of home at all. My apartment has never had anything weird happen. No unexplainable noises, no items moving on their own, nothing. It's been normal, which is why I'd almost forgotten how unsettling my parents' place could be until I visited them last month. It was supposed to be a nice holiday visit. Mom had decorated the whole house. Dad was planning to smoke a turkey, and my brother was bringing his new girlfriend. I arrived on Friday evening, and everything seemed fine at first. We had dinner, watched a movie, and caught up on each other's lives. I felt a little on edge. I always do in that house, but nothing unusual happened. That night I slept in my old bedroom. Everything was exactly as I'd left it years ago. My parents never changed a thing. Same twin bed with the blue comforter, same posters on the wall, same creaky floorboard by the closet. I remember lying there, scrolling through my phone and feeling a bit anxious, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was just being back in that house. I tried to fall asleep around 11, but my mind kept racing. I was thinking about work deadlines, wondering if I'd packed enough clothes, mentally planning the week ahead. You know how it goes when your brain won't shut up. I must have been lying there for about an hour, still wide awake, when it happened. It started with my eyes. They suddenly felt incredibly heavy, like someone had placed weights on my eyelids. I thought, finally, I'm falling asleep. But then I realized this wasn't normal tiredness. This was different. My entire face began to tingle like when your foot falls asleep, but more intense. The tingling spread rapidly down my neck, across my shoulders, through my chest, and all the way to my toes. Within seconds, my entire body was numb. Then came the ringing in my ears, not the subtle kind you get when it's too quiet, but a loud, piercing tone that drowned out everything else. I could still hear the house settling and the wind outside, but they sounded distant, like I was underwater. The scariest part was when my vision went black. Not like closing your eyes where you still see some light through your eyelids or some phosphenes dancing around. This was complete, absolute darkness. I couldn't see anything at all. I panicked. I tried to get up, to move my arms, my legs, anything, but I couldn't feel my body anymore. It was like I was disconnected from it. The only sensation I had was falling, continuously falling through empty space without ever hitting bottom. You know that feeling when you're almost asleep and suddenly jerk awake because you feel like you're falling. It was like that, except it didn't stop. I just kept falling and falling. I tried to scream for my mom. I really did. I tried to force any sound out, but all I could manage was this weak, raspy, gurgling noise that barely made it past my lips. I don't know if anyone would have heard it from down the hall. The whole time, I was conscious. That's what makes this different from sleep paralysis or a nightmare. I was fully aware of what was happening. I knew I was in my bed in my parents' house. I knew something was very wrong, and I was more terrified than I've ever been in my life. I don't know exactly how long it lasted. It felt like forever, but was probably around 5 to 10 minutes. Then, slowly, everything started to reverse. The falling sensation ebbed away. The ringing in my ears quieted. The tingling returned, working its way back up from my toes to my head, and finally, my vision came back. I could see my room again, dimly lit by the streetlight outside my window. I was drenched in sweat and shaking uncontrollably. I sat up and turned on my bedside lamp. My phone said it was 12:03 in the morning. I got up, legs still wobbly, and drank some water from the glass on my nightstand. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. After about 10 minutes of sitting there trying to calm down, I convinced myself it must have been some weird sleep phenomenon. Maybe I'd actually fallen asleep without realizing it and had a particularly vivid nightmare. I was exhausted, so I turned off the light and laid back down, pulling the covers up to my chin. As soon as I closed my eyes, it started again. Exactly the same sequence. Heavy eyes, tingling face, numbness spreading down my body, ringing ears, blackness, falling, that horrible choking feeling when I tried to call out. This time I knew what was happening, which somehow made it worse. I tried to fight it. I tried to move my fingers, my toes, anything. I silently screamed in my head, "Stop! Leave me alone!" But nothing changed. I was trapped again in that terrifying state, fully conscious but completely disconnected from my body. The second episode also lasted about the same amount of time before gradually subsiding. When I could move again, I immediately jumped out of bed and turned on every light in the room. I was beyond scared now. I was approaching hysteria. I checked my phone, 12:10. I didn't want to wake my parents. They're in their 60s, and I didn't want to frighten them. Plus, what would I even say? Hey, something in your haunted house is trying to, what? Possess me? Kill me? I didn't know what was happening myself. Instead, I sat cross-legged in the middle of my bed and started praying. I'm not even particularly religious, but I was desperate. I whispered over and over, "I only accept light and good energy. Please protect me. I only accept light and good energy." I focused on visualizing a bright light surrounding me, protecting me from whatever this was. Despite my prayers, it happened a third time. Same progression, same sensations, same helplessness, same terror. When it finally released me, I checked the time again, 12:15. 3 episodes in just 15 minutes, but each one felt so much longer. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept all the lights on, played videos on my phone, and even rearranged my room a bit, anything to stay active and alert. When morning finally came, I felt physically ill from exhaustion and fear. At breakfast, I casually asked my parents if they'd ever experienced anything new with the house's haunting. Mom mentioned that the kitchen cabinet doors had been opening on their own lately, and Dad said he'd been hearing footsteps in the attic more frequently. Nothing like what I'd experienced. I know some of you might suggest marijuana or sleep paralysis, but I hadn't smoked anything. I rarely do anyway, and this wasn't sleep paralysis. I've had sleep paralysis before, that feeling of being awake but unable to move while seeing strange figures or hearing sounds. This was different. With sleep paralysis, you feel like you're awake in your room, just unable to move. With this, I couldn't see my room at all. I was somewhere else, somewhere dark, falling endlessly. My family has always known something negative resides in that house. We've felt it, heard it, sometimes even glimpsed it, but in all my years growing up there, it never affected me like this. It never targeted me personally. I've been trying to make sense of what happened. Was it trying to communicate with me? Was it attacking me? Was it trying to pull my spirit out of my body? I keep thinking about how methodical it was, starting with my eyes, then working down my entire body, like it was systematically shutting me down. I cut my visit short and left the next day, making up an excuse about a work emergency. I haven't been back since, and honestly, I'm not sure when I'll be ready to return. I've been having nightmares about that falling sensation, about being trapped in darkness while fully conscious. I'm writing this from my apartment, 300 miles away from my parents' house, but sometimes when I'm about to fall asleep, I feel my eyes getting heavy in that same unnatural way, and I jolt myself awake in panic. Has anyone else experienced something like this? I need to understand what happened to me that night, because whatever it was, I'm terrified it might find me again, even here. Story 5. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I'm not the type to believe in the supernatural or ghost stories. Hell, 15 years on the force at Crestwood PD taught me to trust evidence and facts, not rumors and imagination. But what happened to me last autumn has shaken everything I thought I knew about reality, and I need to put it somewhere before it eats me alive. I'm Daniel Turner. I was a police officer with the Crestwood Police Department for 15 years. Was that still hard to write? I always preferred the night shift. There's something peaceful about patrolling a small town while everyone else is asleep. Crestwood isn't exactly a hotbed of criminal activity, mostly just teenagers getting into mischief, the occasional drunk driver, or checking on elderly residents when their medical alarms go off. The quiet suited me. I knew every street, every corner, every shortcut. It was my town. That night started like any other. It was mid-October, just cold enough that I could see my breath when I stepped outside the station. The fall leaves were everywhere, making that satisfying crunch under my boots as I walked to my patrol car. My sergeant had just handed me a coffee, black with 2 sugars, the way I always take it. "Quiet night ahead, Turner," he'd said, if only he'd known. Around 11:30 the call came in. A resident who lived near Crestwood Cemetery reported seeing flashlights moving around inside, probably just kids messing around, looking for a Halloween thrill. The cemetery is one of the oldest in the state, dating back to the 1700s. Some of the town's founders are buried there, along with generations of Crestwood families. I radioed in that I'd check it out. The cemetery was only about 10 minutes from where I was patrolling. As I drove, I noticed fog starting to roll in. Not unusual for October in our area, especially near the river that runs behind the cemetery. But this fog was different somehow, thicker. It seemed to swallow my headlights, making it hard to see more than 20 feet ahead. When I reached the cemetery entrance, something was already off. The iron gates stood wide open. That's never supposed to happen. The caretaker, Old Man Jenkins, is religious about locking them at sunset. I've known him for years. He's never once forgotten. I called in my arrival to dispatch and mentioned the open gates. "Maybe the trespassers broke in," the dispatcher suggested. "The lock doesn't appear damaged," I replied, examining it with my flashlight. "It looks like someone used a key." I pulled my patrol car just inside the entrance and got out. The silence hit me immediately. You know how fog sometimes muffles sound? This was beyond that. It was like someone had pressed a mute button on the world. No crickets, no distant traffic noise. Not even the sound of my own footsteps seemed to carry. Just dead silence. I flipped on my flashlight and started walking between the headstones. The beam barely cut through the fog, which had gotten so thick it seemed to have substance, like walking through cobwebs. The moisture clung to my face, cold and clammy. That's when I first heard them. Whispers. So faint I thought I was imagining it at first, like dozens of conversations happening just below the threshold of hearing. I stopped walking, thinking maybe I'd pick up some direction, figure out where these supposed trespassers were hiding. "Police officer, anyone here needs to identify themselves now." My voice didn't echo like it should have. Instead, it seemed to be absorbed by the fog. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they intensified, becoming more distinct without becoming more intelligible. It was like listening to a crowd talking in another room, or maybe another language. I couldn't make out words, just the unmistakable cadence of human speech. I kept walking deeper into the cemetery, my hand resting on my holster. The old section of Crestwood Cemetery is on a slight hill with the newer graves spreading out below. As I climbed higher, the fog swirled around my legs, so thick now that I couldn't see the ground. The whispers followed me, seeming to come from all directions at once. That's when I saw it, a figure standing about 30 yards ahead, tall and unnaturally thin, just standing motionless among the graves. The fog parted slightly around it, like it was generating some kind of current. "Excuse me, this is the police. The cemetery is closed. Put your hands where I can see them," I called out, unsnapping my holster. The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there. I raised my flashlight to get a better look, but the beam seemed to pass right through it. That's not hyperbole. The light literally went through the figure like it wasn't solid. And then, as I watched, it just dissolved, like smoke dispersing in a breeze, except there was no breeze, just gone. My heart was racing by then. I'm not ashamed to admit I was scared. 15 years on the force, and I'd never experienced anything like this. I called in on my radio, but all I got back was static. Not even the crackle of an empty channel, just a flat, dead static that made my skin crawl. I decided to head back to my car. Whatever was happening, I needed backup, and my radio wasn't working in this fog. That's when I tripped over something and nearly fell. I pointed my flashlight down to see an old tilted gravestone half buried in the ground. It was covered in thick moss and lichen, clearly one of the oldest in the cemetery. Something made me kneel down, some instinct or compulsion I still can't explain. I brushed away some of the moss with my gloved hand to read the inscription. My blood turned to ice in my veins. Daniel Turner. The stone was weathered, the lettering faint but unmistakable. My name, my fucking name, and below it, a death date, October 15th, 2023, today's date. I scrambled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. This was impossible. Some kind of sick joke? Had someone known I'd be responding to this call? The whispers suddenly grew louder, more insistent. They were all around me now, some seeming to come from directly behind me, others from the ground itself. I spun around, drawing my weapon, but there was nothing there, just fog and headstones. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "This isn't funny. Show yourself." The fog began to shift and move in ways fog shouldn't move. It gathered and condensed in places, forming vague human-shaped outlines all around me. Dozens of them, maybe more. Pale, translucent figures with hollow spaces where eyes should be. I fired my weapon. I'm not proud of it. It was panic. Pure and simple. The sound was deafening in the silence, but the bullet passed through the nearest figure without effect, just like my flashlight beam had. The figure didn't even seem to notice. They were closing in now, these fog people or whatever they were. The whispers had become a cacophony, like standing in the middle of a crowded room with everyone talking at once. I could almost make out words now, my name, over and over, and other things I couldn't quite grasp, but that filled me with dread. I turned to run and felt the ground shift beneath me, not like an earthquake, more like stepping onto what you thought was solid ground only to find it's liquid. My feet went out from under me and I was falling. I don't know how to describe what happened next. Darkness, cold, the sensation of countless hands touching me, tugging at my clothes, my skin, the whispers directly in my ears now, somehow inside my head. Time seemed to stretch and compress. I could have been falling for seconds or hours. When I came to, I was lying face down in wet grass. The fog was gone. The sun was up. I was outside the cemetery gates, which were now closed and locked. My patrol car was parked nearby on the street, though I had definitely driven it inside the gates last night. I staggered to my feet, disoriented and chilled to the bone. My uniform was soaked with dew, my weapon still in its holster. My radio crackled to life. Dispatch asking for my 20. According to them, I hadn't responded to calls for nearly 6 hours. 6 hours I cannot account for. I went back to the station in a daze. My sergeant took one look at me and sent me home, assuming I'd fallen asleep on duty. I didn't correct him. What could I say? That I'd seen my own gravestone, that ghosts had pulled me into the ground. I called in sick the next day, and the next. I couldn't bring myself to go back to work. A week later, I resigned from the force, despite having no other job lined up. I couldn't explain why, not without sounding crazy. Since that night, I've been back to the cemetery 3 times in broad daylight. I've searched every inch of the old section. There is no gravestone with my name on it, not a single one. I've researched the history of Crestwood, looking for any other Daniel Turner who might have lived and died here. Nothing. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in, I hear whispers outside my window. And when I look in the mirror, I swear I look different. Older, maybe. Or like something fundamental has changed that I can't quite put my finger on. I don't know what happened to me that night at Crestwood Cemetery. I don't know if I imagined it all or if I experienced something beyond normal human understanding. All I know is that according to a gravestone that may or may not exist, Daniel Turner died that night. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if that's exactly what happened. Story 6. I can't believe it's been nearly 30 years since this happened, but I still get goosebumps every time I think about it. I was just 6 years old back in '95 when my dad took me to work with him at the Feather River Inn in Plumas County, California. My dad was a Finnish carpenter, and he'd been hired to help renovate parts of this massive old building from 1915. I remember being so excited when he told me I could come along that day. School was out, Mom was busy, and I guess he figured I could entertain myself while he worked. The drive there was beautiful, all those pine trees and mountains, but I was more excited about the place being haunted. Yeah, that's right. Even at 6, I knew all about the stories. My dad had mentioned it offhandedly to my mom, not realizing I was listening. He'd said something like, "The crew says that old hotel is full of ghosts, especially the 3rd floor." After that, wild horses couldn't have kept me away. The Feather River Inn wasn't just any old building. It was this grand wooden structure that had been a fancy hotel back in the day and later some kind of prep school. When we pulled up that morning, I remember thinking it looked exactly how a haunted place should look. Big windows, old wood, and this feeling like it was watching us. Dad parked his truck, grabbed his toolbox, and we headed inside. The place smelled like old wood, dust, and something else I couldn't name, kind of musty and strange. There were other workers there already, hammering and sawing and yelling to each other. Dad introduced me to a few guys, told me to stay out of the way, and got to work on the 2nd floor. Now, the layout of this place is important. The 2nd floor, where my dad was working, was built in a square. There was one long hallway that ran all the way around the perimeter of the building, with rooms on the outside. Standing at one corner, you could see all the way down to the next corner where the hallway turned. Dad was fixing some of the old door frames, and I was bored out of my mind after about 20 minutes. "Can I explore?" I asked him. He looked up from measuring a piece of wood. "Stay on this floor where I can find you. Don't go to the 3rd floor. It's dangerous up there." Naturally, the 3rd floor was exactly where I wanted to go after hearing that, but I nodded like the good kid I was pretending to be. "What's up there anyway?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Dad wiped some sweat from his forehead. "Nothing good. The whole floor's falling apart. Nobody's worked on it yet." One of the other carpenters nearby, I think his name was Bill, chuckled. "Tell him about the cats." My ears perked up immediately. "What cats?" Dad shot Bill an annoyed look. "They found some mummified cats in one of the walls up there when they were checking the structure. Old buildings sometimes have that. People used to put them there for luck or something." Bill snorted. "Luck ain't the word for it, and don't forget those freaky paintings." Now I was really interested. "What paintings?" "Just some old graffiti," Dad said, clearly trying to downplay it. "Black and white swirls, nothing interesting." "Like hypnosis circles," Bill added, making a spiral motion with his finger. "Real weird stuff. Probably from when it was a school." Dad told Bill to get back to work and me to go find something to do on the 2nd floor. I wandered off, my head filled with mummified cats and hypnosis circles. Every shadow seemed darker, every creak of the old building more significant. For a while, I just walked around the square hallway, peeking into rooms where no one was working. Some were empty, some had drop cloths and tools. The hallway itself was in decent shape. The lights worked and the floor was mostly solid, though it creaked under my sneakers. After maybe an hour of exploring and bothering the workers with questions, I found myself standing at the eastern corner of the hallway. Dad was all the way on the other side, and from where I stood, I could see down both stretches of the corridor that met at my corner. The hallway was well lit where I was standing, sunshine coming through windows along one side. That's when I saw her. At the far end of the hallway to my right, where it turned the corner, I noticed someone peeking around, just their face and maybe a shoulder, like they were checking to see who was in the hallway. It was a woman with what I thought was long, curly black hair. Her skin looked really pale, and she had dark makeup around her eyes. At least that's what I thought it was at the time. My first thought was that she must be someone's wife or girlfriend coming to visit. Without even thinking about it, I smiled and waved, the way kids do. She waved back, but something felt off. The way she moved wasn't quite right. And why wasn't anyone else noticing her? There were at least 2 workers in the hallway between us, but they just kept working like she wasn't there. I kept looking at her and she kept staring at me. Her expression never changed, just this blank, emotionless stare. No smile, nothing, just staring with those dark eyes. For some reason I glanced behind me, just a quick reflex, I guess. When I looked back, not even a second later, she was gone. I stood there for a moment, confused. Had she walked away? I hadn't heard any footsteps, and those old floors creaked with every step. Curious, I started walking down the hallway toward where she'd been. The workers I passed didn't seem concerned about anything, just focused on their tasks. When I reached the corner where I'd seen her, I turned and froze. This section of the hallway was completely dark, no working lights, no workers. The floor was covered in dust and debris, and there were holes in some of the walls. This part of the building clearly hadn't been renovated yet. It looked nothing like the well-lit hallway I'd just come from, and there was absolutely nowhere this woman could have gone. No open doorways nearby, no staircases, just a dark, abandoned hallway that no one was working on. That's when the fear really hit me. I realized several things all at once, and each realization made my skin crawl more than the last. The woman's lower half hadn't been visible around the corner, not because she was peeking, but because there was no lower half. Her hair wasn't curly. It was wild and floated around her head in a way that hair shouldn't move. Her skin wasn't just pale. It was an unnatural paper white that no living person has. And what I had thought was dark eye makeup, they were just empty, black holes where eyes should have been. I had waved at something, and it had waved back. I ran. I ran as fast as my 6-year-old legs could carry me, back to where my dad was working. I crashed into him, nearly knocking the measuring tape from his hand. "Whoa, what's wrong?" he asked, steadying me. I couldn't speak at first, just clung to his leg. When I finally managed to tell him what happened, he got really quiet. He didn't laugh it off or tell me I was imagining things. Instead, he looked down the hallway where I'd seen her, then picked up his tools. "We're taking a break," he told his co-worker, "going to get lunch in town." In the truck, Dad asked me to tell him exactly what I'd seen. I described the woman in detail, the hair, the eyes, the way she vanished. He listened without interrupting. "Have you seen her before?" I asked when I finished. He shook his head. "Number. But some of the guys have talked about seeing a woman on the 2nd floor, always at a distance, always disappearing." "Is she a ghost?" I asked, both terrified and thrilled at the possibility. Dad didn't answer right away. He was usually so practical about everything, but this had him rattled. "I don't know what she is," he finally said. "But you're not coming back here with me." We ate lunch at a diner in town, and I could tell Dad was trying to cheer me up, talking about normal things and ordering me a chocolate milkshake. But I couldn't stop thinking about those empty black eyes and how natural it had felt to wave at her, like some part of me had been pulled toward her. Dad did take me back to the inn that afternoon. He had to finish his work, but he made me sit in the main lobby where the foreman's desk was set up. I didn't argue. I didn't want to go back upstairs. As we were leaving at the end of the day, I noticed one of the older workers watching me. He came over as Dad was loading his tools into the truck. "Your boy okay?" he asked. "Heard he had a scare." Dad just nodded, but the man crouched down to my level. "You saw the lady with the black eyes, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded, surprised. "She likes children," he said, his voice serious. "She used to be a teacher here, they say. Died in 1930-something. Doesn't mean any harm, but..." He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "But what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Just don't wave at her again," he said. "Don't invite her to notice you." Dad finished the job at Feather River Inn 2 weeks later. He never took me back, and he always seemed relieved when he came home from working there. A few years later, I heard the place had closed down completely for renovations, then reopened as some kind of retreat center. I'm 35 now, and I've researched the history of the inn extensively as an adult. I found old newspaper articles about the place, records of who owned it, who worked there. I've never found any mention of a teacher dying there in the 30s, or any deaths that match the woman I saw. What haunts me most isn't just seeing a ghost, it's the fact that I waved at her, and she waved back. That moment of connection with something that wasn't human. Sometimes I wake up from dreams where I'm standing in that hallway again, but this time, when she waves, she starts moving toward me, her feet not touching the ground, those black holes where her eyes should be getting larger as she gets closer. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't looked away that day. I don't know what she wanted. But even now, decades later, I still can't explain why my first instinct was to wave at something so clearly wrong, so clearly not of this world. It's like some part of me recognized her before my conscious mind understood what I was seeing, and that terrifies me more than the ghost itself. Story 7. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that night. I'm 21 now, but I was 16 when it happened, and it's one of those experiences that makes you question everything you thought you knew about reality. My name's Jesse, and I've always been the weird one in my family. Ever since I was little, I've felt things others couldn't. I'd wake up feeling like someone was sitting on the edge of my bed, or I'd catch these dark shadows moving in my peripheral vision. My mom used to think I was just having nightmares until one morning when I was around 7. I described a man standing in the corner of my room all night, an older guy with a flannel shirt and suspenders. Mom went white as a sheet because I had just described my grandfather who died before I was born. I'd never even seen pictures of him dressed like that. As I got older, the experiences kept happening. Sometimes I'd feel fingers brush against my arm when I was alone in my room. Other times I'd be doing homework and suddenly feel like someone was watching me, that heavy feeling of being observed. My little Chiweenie, Buster, would sometimes stare and bark at empty corners of my bedroom for no reason. When I was 12, things got intense enough that my mom finally took me to this medium in town, this older lady named Sylvia, who lived in this tiny house filled with crystals and weird-smelling incense. I remember feeling immediately comfortable there, like the air was somehow familiar. Sylvia took one look at me and said, "Oh, honey, you're a beacon for them." She explained that some people just have an energy that spirits are drawn to, like moths to a porch light. She taught me some protection techniques, but honestly, I was more fascinated than scared. My mom, though, she was freaked. She banned anything remotely supernatural from our house. No Ouija boards, no ghost hunting shows, and especially no horror movies. She was convinced that exposure to that stuff would make it worse, like my weird sensitivity was some kind of disease that could be triggered. But by 16, I was over her rules. My friends were all obsessed with the Conjuring movies, and when the third one came out, I lied and said I was going to the mall with my friend Amber. Instead, we went to see it, and then I went back again the next weekend because I was so fascinated by it. There was something about the way they portrayed the spiritual world that felt, I don't know, kind of familiar in a weird way. Anyway, this all leads up to that night. It was summer break, around the beginning of July. Our house in Oakwood Heights was this old 2-story with creaky floors and weird cold spots that I'd gotten used to over the years. My room was on the 2nd floor, and my sister Lauren's was downstairs. My parents were out of town at some work conference for my dad, so it was just us and our dogs at home. I'd been staying up late scrolling through TikTok with my LED light set to purple, my favorite color that summer. It was probably around 1 in the morning when Buster, who had been curled up asleep at the foot of my bed, suddenly sat up. His ears perked forward. and he started making this low growl I rarely heard from him. "What's wrong, buddy?" I whispered, following his gaze to my closet. The closet door was closed, nothing unusual there. My purple lights cast this soft glow around the room, making shadows look deeper than they actually were. But Buster wasn't looking at shadows. He was staring directly at the closet door, and his growl was getting more intense. Then his hackles rose, you know, when the fur on their back stands up. Buster is this tiny little thing, half Chihuahua, half Dachshund, so seeing him trying to look intimidating would normally be funny. But there was nothing funny about how rigid his body had become, or how he was showing his teeth. My heart started pounding. I've had plenty of weird experiences, but Buster almost never reacted to them. He's usually this super chill dog who sleeps through everything. Something was different this time. I grabbed my phone and texted Lauren. "Can you come up here? Buster's freaking out and I'm scared." While waiting for her, I didn't take my eyes off the closet. There was this weird pressure in the room, like when you're on an airplane and your ears need to pop. The air felt thick, almost electric, and it was cold. Not like air conditioning cold, but that unnatural cold that seems to seep into your bones. I heard Lauren's footsteps on the stairs, and then she was at my door with her dog Pepper, this scrappy little terrier mix. "What's going on?" she whispered, and before I could answer, Pepper started growling too, facing the exact same spot as Buster. "They're both doing it," I said, my voice sounding strangely small in the room. "Look at the closet." Lauren followed my gaze, and at first there was nothing, just my white closet door against the purple-lit wall. But then, God, it's still hard to describe even years later. The air in front of the closet started to change. It wasn't exactly visible at first, more like how the air looks above hot pavement, wavy and distorted, but as we watched, it began to take shape. Not a human shape, nothing that defined. It was more like an orb or a ball of energy, about the size of a basketball. The wood grain of the closet door behind it looked warped and stretched, like we were seeing it through curved glass. "Are you seeing this?" I whispered, afraid that speaking too loud would make it disappear. Lauren nodded slowly, her eyes wide. "What the fuck is that?" she breathed. The orb-like distortion was pulsating slightly, almost like it was breathing. It didn't give off light exactly, but the purple from my LED strips seemed to reflect off it differently than the rest of the room, and the weirdest part? I wasn't scared. I mean, my heart was racing and my palms were sweaty, but it wasn't terror. It was more like awe, fascination. "I think it's a spirit," I said softly, "like an actual manifestation." Lauren grabbed my arm, her nails digging in slightly. "Should we leave? Should we call someone?" But I couldn't take my eyes off it. "No, I don't think it's dangerous. It doesn't feel threatening." And it didn't. If anything, it felt curious, like it was as interested in us as we were in it. Both dogs were still growling, but they weren't barking or trying to attack. They were in protective mode, staying close to us, but they weren't panicking. "It's moving," Lauren whispered. The orb was drifting very slowly to the left, still in front of the closet. It moved maybe a foot before it seemed to fade slightly, becoming less distinct. Then it vanished completely. For a moment, we both just sat there, stunned. The dogs were still tense, still staring at the same area. "Did it leave?" Lauren asked. Before I could answer, the distortion reappeared, this time about 3 feet to the right of where it had been, closer to the corner of my room. It was more defined this time, the edges of it more distinct against the background of my lavender-colored wall. "Holy shit," Lauren breathed. "This is really happening." We sat on my bed, huddled together with our dogs, and just watched it. For almost an hour, this thing moved around the area in front of my closet. Sometimes it would disappear for a few seconds before reappearing in a slightly different spot. Occasionally, it would pulse more strongly, the distortion becoming more pronounced. Other times, it would grow fainter, almost transparent, before solidifying again. The strangest part was how I felt during all this. There was a connection there, like it was aware of us watching it. At one point, I swear it moved closer when I leaned forward, almost like it was responding to my interest. It never came too close, though, staying within that area near my closet. "Do you think it's trying to communicate?" Lauren asked, after we'd been watching it for maybe 30 minutes. "I don't know," I said, "but I don't think it's just random energy. It feels conscious." "Like a ghost?" Lauren had always been skeptical of my experiences growing up. She never outright said I was making things up, but I could tell she thought I was being dramatic or had an overactive imagination. But now she was seeing it too. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's something that was never human." Sylvia, that medium mom took me to, she said there are different kinds of entities. Some are human spirits, but some are just energy that's always existed. The orb pulsed brighter for a moment, as if responding to our conversation. Both dogs had finally settled down a bit, still alert but no longer growling continuously. "It almost seems playful," Lauren said, "like it's excited we can see it." And she was right. There was an almost childlike quality to its movements, the way it would vanish and reappear, the way it seemed to react when we talked about it. It reminded me of playing peekaboo with a toddler. We must have watched it for at least an hour. Neither of us wanted to leave or even look away. It was like being at the zoo and spotting an animal doing something amazing. You're afraid if you turn away, you'll miss something you might never see again. Eventually, Lauren brought her blanket up from her room, and we both sat on my bed just observing. The orb continued its strange dance, sometimes fading almost completely before becoming more solid again. The dogs eventually calmed down enough to curl up at our feet, though they kept their eyes fixed on the phenomenon. I don't remember falling asleep. The last thing I recall is the orb pulsing gently near my dresser, casting weird shadows across my collection of crystals. When I woke up around 9 the next morning, Lauren was still asleep beside me, both dogs curled up between us. The room was normal, just my regular bedroom lit by morning sunlight streaming through the blinds. The first thing I did was look at Lauren. I needed to confirm that someone else had seen it, that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. When she woke up a few minutes later, the first words out of her mouth were, "That really happened, right?" The relief I felt was indescribable. For years, I'd experienced things that no one else could see or feel. I'd started to doubt myself, to wonder if my mom was right and there was something wrong with my brain. But Lauren had seen it too. She'd witnessed the same phenomenon, the same movements, the same strange pulsing orb. We spent the whole morning talking about it, comparing notes, making sure our experiences matched up. They did, down to the smallest detail. We both described the same movements, the same reactions, the same feelings. We never told our parents. Mom would have freaked out and probably called in a priest or something. Dad would have dismissed it as our imaginations or tried to find some logical explanation involving gas leaks or electrical fields. But Lauren and I know what we saw. The entity never returned, at least not in that visible form, but sometimes Buster still stares at that spot near my closet, his ears perked forward in that alert way. And sometimes when I'm alone in my room, I get that same feeling of being watched, that same electric sensation in the air. I've done a lot of research since then, trying to understand what we experienced. Was it a ghost, a spirit, some kind of interdimensional energy? I don't have answers, just theories, but I know what I saw, and more importantly, I know I'm not alone in having seen it. That night changed my relationship with Lauren too. She went from being skeptical of my weird experiences to being my biggest ally. She never doubts me now when I tell her I've felt something in the house. It's been 5 years, and I still can't explain what happened that night after watching The Conjuring 3. All I know is that something wanted to be seen, and for whatever reason, both of us were able to see it. Story 8. I'm still not sure if I should be writing this. It's been 3 months since I quit my job at the community center in Oakville, Alabama, and I haven't told anyone the real reason why. My family thinks it was the long commute. My friends assume I got a better offer somewhere else. The truth is, I couldn't stand being around Elaine anymore. Not because I disliked her, quite the opposite. I was terrified for her, and eventually terrified of what might happen to me just by being near her. I started working at the community center about 2 years ago. It was just administrative work, scheduling rooms, organizing local events, handling payments for classes. Nothing exciting, but the pay was decent for rural Alabama, and I liked being part of something that brought people together. Elaine was hired about 6 months after me. She seemed normal enough at first, quiet, polite, kept to herself mostly. She was 37, about 12 years older than me, with this soft brown hair she always wore in a messy bun. Something about her seemed worn down, but I figured that was just life, you know? We didn't talk much those first few weeks. Then one day I noticed her sketching during lunch break. I've always been into art, so I asked to see what she was working on. It was this incredibly detailed drawing of a bird. Not just any bird, but one with human eyes that seemed to follow you. Creepy, but beautiful. We started talking about art, and suddenly we had this connection. We'd chat during breaks about painters we liked, techniques we wanted to try. It was nice having someone at work who shared my interests. About a month into our friendship, things started getting weird. It began with small comments that didn't quite make sense. She'd say things like, "They wouldn't let me sleep again last night," or "I can feel him trying to get in." I'd ask what she meant, and she'd just change the subject, like she hadn't realized she'd spoken out loud. Then one Tuesday in April, everything changed. We were alone in the break room. It was raining outside, that heavy southern rain that makes everything feel isolated and too quiet. Elaine looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes, hair unwashed, wearing the same clothes as the day before. I asked if she was okay, and that's when she broke down. "I think I can trust you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't told anyone this, but I'm under a curse." I thought she was joking at first, but her face was dead serious. She told me about her ex-boyfriend, Marcus. They'd dated for about 3 years before she ended things when she found out he was cheating. But according to Elaine, Marcus wasn't just any guy. He was into dark stuff, as she put it. "He had these books," she said, rubbing her arms like she was cold, though it was at least 80 degrees in that room. Old books with symbols I couldn't read. He'd lock himself in the spare bedroom for hours. I could hear him chanting sometimes. I nodded, trying to be supportive while thinking she was probably exaggerating about an ex who was just into some weird hobby. But then she leaned in closer. After I left him, strange things started happening. I'd wake up and furniture would be moved. I'd find scratches on my skin that I didn't remember getting. Then the noises started, these high-pitched sounds that nobody else could hear. She pulled up her sleeve and I saw them, these long, thin scratches running from her wrist to her elbow. They looked fresh, angry red against her pale skin. "But that's not even the worst part," she continued, lowering her voice even though we were alone. "He's using something he calls body hacking software version 6.0. He told me about it once when he was drunk, said it was the next level of what the government was already using, but more advanced, said it could hijack someone's nervous system remotely." I remember exactly how my stomach dropped when she said that. Not because I believed her, but because I realized she truly believed it herself. This wasn't just a weird story to her. "How does it work?" I asked, not knowing what else to say. "It sends signals to my brain, makes my muscles move without me telling them to, makes me see things that aren't there. Sometimes I'll be walking, and suddenly my leg will jerk to the side for no reason, or I'll feel like someone's pressing against my back when I'm alone in a room." She rolled up her other sleeve and showed me bruises on her upper arm, finger-shaped marks that made my skin crawl. These showed up after I had a dream that Marcus was dragging me out of bed. But it wasn't a dream. I think he can project himself somehow. Or maybe it's not him directly, but whatever he summoned. Over the next few weeks, Elaine shared more with me. She started showing up at work with this strange, glazed look, like she wasn't fully there. One morning I found her in the supply closet crying silently. When I asked what was wrong, she just shook her head and whispered, "He was in my house last night, not physically, but I could feel him moving around inside me." The way she described it made me sick to my stomach. She said it felt like someone was pressing against the inside of her skin, trying to push out, like her organs were being rearranged. About a month after her first confession, she came to work, looking almost triumphant. "I figured out how to block some of it," she told me. "The metal disrupts the signals." That's when she showed me pictures on her phone of how she'd been sleeping, with a large stock pot on her head, secured with bungee cords. She said the pot blocked out the control noises that prevented her from sleeping properly. "It works," she insisted. "I got 4 hours of uninterrupted sleep last night, first time in months. I wanted to tell her to see a doctor, but I'd already suggested that, and she'd explained that doctors couldn't help with supernatural problems. Instead, she was seeing Father Michael at St. Augustine's 3 times a week. She was convinced she was possessed, or at least partially controlled by something otherworldly. Father Michael believes me," she said. "He's performed 2 minor exorcisms already, but Marcus's power is strong. The priest says we need to find the object that's channeling the curse." The most disturbing thing wasn't just what Elaine was saying, it was what I could see happening to her physically. Her face was changing. It wasn't normal aging. It was like fear was carving itself into her skin. Deep lines appeared around her eyes and mouth that weren't laugh lines. They were fear lines. Terror etched permanently into her face. By June, she'd lost at least 20 pounds. Her clothes hung off her frame. Her hands shook constantly. But her eyes, that was the worst part. They'd always dart around, like she was tracking something invisible moving through the room. One day in early July, I arrived at work to find police cars outside the community center. My heart nearly stopped. I thought something had happened to Elaine, but it was worse in a way. She'd come to work at 3 in the morning, broken into the art supply closet and painted symbols all over the walls of the main meeting room. Not with regular paint, but with a mixture of red paint and what looked like blood. Her blood. They found her curled up in the corner, her arms covered in small cuts, whispering about how she had to seal the room to keep him out. She was taken to the hospital for psychiatric evaluation. I visited her there the next day. The doctors had sedated her, but she was still lucid enough to talk. As soon as she saw me, she grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "He knows I told you," she whispered urgently. "You're in danger now too. The software can spread through prolonged contact." I tried to reassure her, to tell her everything would be okay, but she just gave me this look of such pity that it made my blood run cold. "You'll see," she said. "You'll start noticing it soon. First, it's just little things, a finger twitching when you didn't mean to move it. Then you'll hear the buzzing at night. By then it's already too late." They released her after 72 hours with prescriptions for antipsychotics and a referral to a therapist. She came back to work the following week, subdued and embarrassed about the incident. She apologized to everyone and promised it wouldn't happen again. The director put her on probation but let her keep her job. For about 2 weeks, things seemed better. She was taking her medication. She looked calmer, though still exhausted. Then one day, she came to my desk and slipped me a note before walking away. It read, "The meds are making it easier for him to control me. I'm stopping them. Don't tell anyone." The next day, she called in sick, and the next. By the 3rd day, I was worried enough to drive to her apartment after work. She lived in this small complex on the edge of town, surrounded by pine trees that made everything feel isolated. I knocked on her door for several minutes before she finally answered. The person who opened the door barely resembled the Elaine I knew. Her hair was matted and tangled. She'd lost more weight, but the worst part was her eyes. They were bloodshot and wild, darting around constantly. Behind her, I could see into her apartment. Every mirror was covered with black garbage bags. Aluminum foil lined the windows. Papers with strange symbols were taped to every wall. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice hoarse. "It's not safe." Despite her warning, she let me in. The apartment smelled of sweat and something else, something chemical I couldn't identify. The furniture had all been pushed against the walls, leaving the center of the living room empty, except for a circle drawn in what looked like salt or sugar. "This is my safe zone," she explained, stepping into the circle. "He can't make me do things when I'm in here. I didn't know what to say. I asked if she'd been taking her medication. She laughed, a hollow, frightening sound. Those pills are part of it, don't you see? They're all connected. The doctors, Marcus, the government. The body hacking software is everywhere now. Version 6.0 is just the beginning. She pulled up her shirt to show me her stomach. There were weird geometric patterns drawn on her skin in what looked like marker or pen. These block some of the signals, she explained. I have to redraw them every 6 hours. Father Michael helped me design them based on ancient protective symbols. I stayed for about an hour, trying to convince her to come back to work, to see her doctor again. She refused. As I was leaving, she grabbed my arm with that same surprising strength. Watch for the signs, she warned. Unexplained bruises, electronics malfunctioning around you, dreams where you're awake but can't move. If you notice any of these, come to me immediately. I can help you fight it. That was the last time I saw her. I quit my job the next day, made up some excuse about a better opportunity. I blocked her number after she called me 17 times in one night, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails about how they were closing in on her. 2 weeks after I quit, I heard from a former co-worker that Elaine had been committed to a psychiatric facility after her landlord found her unconscious in her apartment, severely dehydrated and malnourished. I wish I could say that's where the story ends, that I've moved on and forgotten about Elaine and her delusions. But 3 nights ago, I woke up at exactly 3:15 in the morning to find my right hand clenching and unclenching on its own. For nearly a minute, I watched in horror as my fingers moved without my control. And yesterday, I found a bruise on my back, 5 distinct fingerprints, like someone had grabbed me from behind. I tell myself it's just my imagination, that hearing Elaine's stories for months has made me paranoid. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I swear I can hear a faint buzzing sound. And once, just once, I thought I saw Marcus standing in the corner of my bedroom, even though I've never met the man and wouldn't know what he looks like. I don't know what's happening. I don't believe in curses or body hacking software. I don't. But sometimes I find myself wondering, what if Elaine wasn't crazy after all? Story 9. I can't believe I'm actually writing this down. Part of me thinks nobody will believe it anyway, but I need to get it out of my head. It's been 3 weeks since Halloween, and I still can't sleep properly. Every time I close my eyes, I see those empty, hollow eyes staring back at me. Let me start at the beginning. I'm Emily, and I run a paranormal podcast called Haunted Truth with my 3 friends from college, Mark, Sarah, and David. We're all seniors at UNH, and we've been doing this podcast thing for about 2 years now. Usually it's just us visiting supposedly haunted houses or cemeteries, recording some EVPs, and mostly scaring ourselves with our own shadows. Nothing major ever happened until Cedar Grove. Cedar Grove Asylum sits deep in the woods about an hour's drive from campus. It's this massive crumbling brick building that was shut down back in the 60s after some really messed up stuff happened there. The story goes that there was a mass patient breakout and some patients and staff were killed. The whole place was just abandoned afterward. Equipment, furniture, everything just left behind. For years, locals have talked about seeing strange lights through the windows at night and hearing screams coming from inside, even though nobody's supposed to be there. We'd been wanting to check it out for our podcast for ages, and what better time than Halloween night, right? God, I wish we'd never gone. We arrived around 7 in the evening, just as the sun was setting. The asylum was exactly what you'd expect. Broken windows, ivy climbing up the walls, that sort of thing. The front entrance was chained up, but David found a side door that was hanging off its hinges. The 4 of us stood there for a moment, staring at the dark opening, and I remember feeling this weird sensation, like something cold brushed against my neck. Maybe we should come back during daylight, I suggested, but everyone laughed it off. Mark, my boyfriend, well, ex-boyfriend now, that's another story, called me a chicken. I didn't want to seem scared, so I shut up and followed them inside. The interior was worse than I expected. The air was thick with dust and the smell of mold. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing peeling paint, abandoned gurneys, and walls covered in graffiti. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It felt like pressure, like the air itself was pushing against my skin. And then I heard them, whispers, so faint I thought I was imagining it at first. "Do you guys hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" Sarah shined her light at me, the beam catching the dust particles floating around my face. Whispers, like people talking, but I can't make out what they're saying. "It's just the wind," Mark said, but he looked uneasy. We decided to split up to cover more ground. Stupid, I know, but we wanted good material for the podcast. Mark and I took the west wing, while Sarah and David headed east. Before separating, we synchronized our watches and agreed to meet back in the main hall in 2 hours. The west wing was where they kept the more dangerous patients, according to our research. As Mark and I walked down the long corridor, our footsteps echoing on the cracked linoleum, the whispers grew louder. Still unintelligible, but definitely there. "You hear that now, right?" I asked Mark. He nodded, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. "Yeah, what the hell is that?" We found our way to what must have been the isolation ward. Small, windowless cells lined both sides of a narrow hallway. Each door had a small observation window, now just empty frames where glass once was. Mark went ahead recording everything on his camera, while I lingered behind, suddenly reluctant to go further. Check this out," he called, and I forced myself to follow his voice. He was standing in one of the cells, pointing his flashlight at the walls. They were covered in scratches, hundreds, maybe thousands of desperate marks gouged into the concrete. Some formed words, "Help me," and there inside me stood out clearly. "Jesus," I whispered, running my fingers over the scratches. They felt warm, like they'd just been made. That's when we heard the door, the heavy metal door at the end of the isolation ward, slammed shut with a deafening bang. Mark ran to it immediately, pulling at the handle. "It's locked," he said, his voice rising with panic. "It's fucking locked." I tried to stay calm. "It's just the wind or the building settling. These old places make weird noises." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true, because the whispers had stopped. The silence was absolute, pressing against my eardrums like I was deep underwater. Then it got cold. Not just chilly, but bone-deep cold that made my teeth chatter. Our breath came out in visible puffs. The temperature must have dropped 20 degrees in seconds. "Mark," I said, my voice barely audible, "something's wrong." He didn't answer. He was staring into one of the cells, his camera hanging forgotten at his side. I followed his gaze and felt my heart stop. There was someone in the cell, a gaunt figure with skin so pale it seemed to glow in the darkness. It was standing perfectly still in the corner, head bowed. Then slowly, it raised its head and I saw its eyes, or rather, where its eyes should have been, just hollow black sockets that somehow still managed to stare right through me. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. It was like my entire body had frozen solid. The figure took a step forward, then another. It moved wrong, like its joints were broken and reset in the wrong places. And as it came closer, the whispers returned. Not just one voice now, but dozens, all overlapping and fighting to be heard. Mark finally broke from his trance and grabbed my arm. "Run!" We bolted down the corridor, away from the figure, but also away from the locked door. I don't know what we were thinking, just that we needed to get away. We ended up in what must have been a treatment room, old equipment covered in dust, an examination table in the center, cabinets with broken glass fronts. "What the fuck was that?" Mark gasped, leaning against the wall. Before I could answer, we heard something that made my blood run cold. Sarah's scream, distant but unmistakable, coming from somewhere in the East Wing. Meanwhile, from what Sarah told me later, she and David had been experiencing their own nightmare. They'd found their way to the children's ward. Apparently, Cedar Grove used to house children as well, those with severe mental disorders or whose parents simply couldn't handle them. They discovered a playroom with faded murals on the walls, broken toys scattered across the floor. Sarah said they heard a child's giggle, clear as day, and turned to see a rocking chair moving on its own in the corner. David, trying to be brave, approached the chair. "Hello? Is someone there?" The rocking stopped. Then, slowly, a small figure appeared sitting in the chair. Sarah said it looked like a child at first, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with its back to them, but when it turned, its eyes were completely black like pools of oil, and its mouth, Sarah still has trouble talking about this part, its mouth opened wider than any human mouth should, and from it came those same whispers Mark and I had been hearing. They ran, of course. Who wouldn't? But the child thing followed, moving in that same wrong way I'd seen with the figure in the isolation ward. They ended up hiding in what used to be a nurse's station, which is when Sarah screamed. The child thing had somehow appeared inside the station with them, standing right behind David. By some miracle, they managed to escape and were trying to find their way back to the main hall when Mark and I heard the scream. We couldn't get to the east wing because of the locked door at the end of the isolation ward, so we had to find another way around. We backtracked through the west wing, hearts pounding, constantly looking over our shoulders for the gaunt figure. The whispers were everywhere now, coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, like the entire building was alive and speaking to us, and it was getting colder by the minute. We finally found a connecting corridor and raced toward the east wing. That's when the lights started flickering, not our flashlights, but the actual ceiling lights of the asylum. Lights that shouldn't have worked in a building abandoned for over 50 years. Under those stuttering lights, the asylum transformed. For brief moments it looked clean, maintained, like stepping back in time to when it was still operational. And in those flashes, I caught glimpses of other figures, patients in hospital gowns, staff in white uniforms, all staring at us with those same hollow eyes. We found Sarah and David in the main hall, both looking as terrified as we felt. David had a long scratch down his cheek, bleeding freely. "We need to get out of here now," Sarah said, her voice shaking. No one argued. We made for the entrance, but the asylum had other ideas. Every door we tried was either locked or led to a dead end. It was like the building's layout was changing around us, disorienting us on purpose. The whispers had grown to a deafening roar, and the temperature was so low that frost was forming on the walls. And then we saw them. Dozens of figures emerging from doorways and corridors, all moving with that wrong, broken gait. Some wore patient gowns, others staff uniforms. Some looked like they'd been dead for a long time. They didn't run at us. They didn't need to. They just kept coming, slowly, inexorably, closing in from all sides. I don't know how we got out. That part's a blur. I remember running, all of us screaming, turning corners blindly, the figures always just behind us. At some point, we found a window. Not the entrance we'd come in through, but a window on the first floor that had most of its glass missing. We didn't hesitate. We jumped, landing hard on the overgrown grass outside. We ran to the car, piled in, and David drove like a madman back to campus. None of us spoke the entire ride. It wasn't until the next day, when we met to talk about what happened, that we looked at the footage. Most of it was unusable, static, distortion, darkness. But there was one clear frame from Mark's camera, the gaunt figure from the isolation ward, staring directly into the lens with those hollow eyes, and behind it, barely visible in the shadows, were dozens more figures, all watching. We deleted everything, took down our podcast, agreed never to speak about what happened, but I can't stop thinking about it, can't stop hearing those whispers when I'm trying to sleep. The worst part, I've started noticing things. A figure standing at the end of my street when I come home late. Whispers just on the edge of hearing when I'm alone in my apartment. The temperature dropping suddenly for no reason. I think we brought something back with us from Cedar Grove. Or maybe it let us leave so we could lead it out into the world. I don't know what to do. I don't think there's anything I can do except warn others. Stay away from Cedar Grove Asylum. The things that live there, they're not just ghosts or spirits or whatever you want to call them. They're hungry and they're patient and they're waiting. Story 10. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks now. Part of me thinks nobody will believe me, but I need to get this out there. Maybe someone can make sense of what happened to me that night. I've been with the Pine Hill PD for over 10 years, seen a lot of weird stuff in my time. Domestic disputes that made my skin crawl, car accidents that still give me nightmares, even a few cases that just didn't add up no matter how we approached them. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to what happened to me at the Johnson house 3 months ago. For those who don't know about Pine Hill, it's a small town where everyone knows everyone. The Johnson house on Maple Street had been sitting empty for nearly 7 years. The family, Mark, Lisa, and their 6-year-old daughter Sarah, vanished without a trace one night. No signs of struggle, dinner half-eaten on the table, car still in the garage. The case went cold faster than winter in these parts. People talked, of course. Some said Mark had gambling debts and they fled. Others whispered about Lisa having an affair. The more superstitious folks in town had their own theories involving other explanations. It was around 11:30 on a Thursday night in February when the call came in. Mrs. Perkins, an elderly lady who lived across from the Johnson place, reported strange noises coming from the house, lights flickering in windows that shouldn't have electricity. I was on patrol alone that night. Budget cuts meant solo shifts were becoming the norm, so I took the call. The night was pitch black, no moon, no stars, just an inky darkness that seemed to swallow the beam of my flashlight. The temperature had dropped to about 20 degrees, and my breath came out in thick clouds as I approached the house. From the outside, the Johnson place looked like any abandoned house. Paint peeling, shingles missing, yard overgrown. But something felt off. The air around it seemed heavier somehow. I'd driven past this house hundreds of times on patrol, but that night it looked different, more ominous. I noticed right away that the front door was slightly ajar, which immediately raised red flags. We'd had issues with teenagers breaking in to drink or homeless people seeking shelter, but the door had always been secured with a heavy padlock by the bank that now owned the property. "Pine Hill Police," I called out, one hand resting on my holster. "Anyone inside?" Nothing but silence greeted me. I pushed the door open wider with my foot, wincing at the loud creak of rusty hinges. The smell hit me first, musty, like old books and dust, but with something else underneath, something sickly sweet that caught in the back of my throat. I swept my flashlight across the foyer. Everything was exactly as the Johnsons had left it years ago, mail still scattered on the side table, coats hanging on hooks, a pair of child's rain boots by the door. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, undisturbed except for what looked like small footprints leading from the stairs toward the kitchen. "Hello? Police officer. If someone's here, make yourself known." Again, nothing. Just the settling sounds of an old house and the pounding of my own heart in my ears. I made my way through the living room, noting how everything seemed frozen in time. Family photos still lined the mantel, showing a smiling, happy family that had simply ceased to exist. A half-completed puzzle was still spread across the coffee table. Lisa Johnson's reading glasses rested on an open book, as if she had just set them down to answer the phone. That's when I heard it, a soft thud from upstairs, like something being dropped on carpet. My instincts kicked in. "Police! I'm coming upstairs. Identify yourself." I drew my weapon, keeping it pointed down as I approached the staircase. The stairs creaked under my weight as I ascended, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. The upstairs hallway had 4 doors, all closed except one, which was open just a crack. A soft glow seemed to emanate from inside, though I knew there couldn't possibly be working electricity in the house. I approached cautiously, using my foot to push the door open fully. It was a child's bedroom, Sarah's room, pink wallpaper with butterflies, a small desk with coloring books still open, a bookshelf filled with stuffed animals and children's novels, and in the center of the room, sitting on a perfectly made bed, was a teddy bear. The bear was worn, with one eye missing and patches of fur rubbed away. Something about it made my skin crawl. It seemed positioned, like someone had just placed it there. The dust around it was disturbed. I took a quick look around the room, checking the closet and behind the door. Finding nothing, I turned back toward the bed. The teddy bear was gone. I felt my blood run cold. I was absolutely certain it had been there just seconds before. I hadn't taken my eyes off the room except for a brief moment to check behind the door. Is someone in here? My voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Higher, tighter. This isn't funny. Come out now. Silence. I got down on my knees to look under the bed, shining my flashlight into the darkness. There was no teddy bear, but something caught the light and glinted back at me. I reached under and pulled out a small silver locket. It was tarnished, but still beautiful, with ornate engravings and the initials S.J. on the front, Sarah Johnson. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a small photo of Sarah, her blonde hair in pigtails, her smile missing 2 front teeth. On the other side was a lock of blonde hair, secured with a tiny ribbon. That's when the temperature dropped. I'm not talking about a slight chill. I mean, it plummeted so fast that my next breath came out as a thick cloud. The batteries in my flashlight started to dim, the beam weakening until it was barely illuminating a foot in front of me. And then I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I've been in dangerous situations before, faced down armed suspects, walked into volatile domestic disputes, but nothing has ever made me feel the kind of primal fear I experienced in that moment. I turned slowly, scanning the room. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper somehow, almost moving. I told myself it was just the failing light of my flashlight, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I'm a police officer, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm not here to cause any trouble. A giggle, high-pitched and childlike, echoed through the room. I spun around, trying to locate the source, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I decided I'd had enough. Whatever was happening, I needed backup. I turned toward the door, only to watch in horror as it slammed shut. I lunged for the handle, pulling with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. "Help!" I shouted, pounding on the door. "Someone help me!" The giggle came again, closer this time, almost in my ear. I whirled around, pressing my back against the door. The room seemed different now, larger in some places, smaller in others. The walls appeared to pulse, like they were breathing. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Show yourself." My flashlight flickered once more and died completely, plunging the room into darkness. And then, impossibly, the walls began to glow with a faint blue light, illuminating everything in an eerie, cold radiance. The furniture started to shift, rearranging itself without anyone touching it. The bed slid across the floor toward me, the bookshelf emptied, books flying off the shelves and opening in mid-air, pages flipping rapidly. I felt something brush against my back, like fingers trailing down my spine, and I jumped forward, spinning around to find nothing there. The giggling grew louder, more distorted, less childlike and more wrong. It no longer sounded human. The locket in my hand grew ice cold, burning my palm, but I couldn't seem to let it go. "Sarah?" I whispered, not knowing what else to say. "Sarah Johnson, is that you?" The room went silent. Even the strange movement stopped. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then the walls began to close in. Not metaphorically. They were literally moving inward, the room shrinking around me. The ceiling lowered, the floor rose up. I was being crushed from all directions. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred at the edges, dark spots dancing in front of my eyes. The locket in my hand pulsed like a heartbeat. The last thing I remember clearly is hearing a door creak open somewhere. Not the bedroom door, but something else, something deeper. The giggle came one last time, right by my ear, and then everything went black. I woke up 3 days later in Pine Hill Memorial Hospital. According to my chief, they found my patrol car parked outside the Johnson house, my flashlight on the front porch with its batteries drained. After I failed to check in, they sent officers to look for me. They found me unconscious in Sarah's bedroom, the silver locket clutched so tightly in my hand that it left an imprint. The doctors couldn't explain my condition: severe dehydration, hypothermia, and what they called unexplained neurological anomalies. They kept me for observation for 2 weeks. Here's the thing that keeps me up at night. When they found me, the bedroom door was wide open, not broken down, not forced, just open, as if it had never been locked at all. I've been on medical leave ever since. I can't sleep more than an hour at a time without nightmares. Sometimes I hear giggling in empty rooms. And the locket, it disappeared from the evidence locker 3 days after they took it from me. No explanation, no forced entry, just gone. I don't know what happened to the Johnsons that night 7 years ago, but whatever took them, it's still there, waiting in that house. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I swear I can see something standing behind me, just out of focus. Something small, with blonde pigtails and a missing tooth smile. I don't think I got out of that house. Not really. Part of me is still there and always will be. Story 11. I still don't know how to explain what happened that day. I've spent months trying to make sense of it, searching online for similar experiences, but nothing comes close. My hands are shaking just typing this out, but I need to share it with someone who might understand. This happened last October when I was visiting my friend Rachel in Somerset. I'm 20, studying photography at uni, and I was working on this vintage fashion project that required authentic period pieces. Rachel suggested we check out Hemswell Antique Centre since they have this massive collection of vintage clothing. The place was exactly what you'd expect, that musty smell of old things, dimly lit sections with glass cabinets, and rows upon rows of items from different eras. We browsed for nearly 2 hours before I found it, this salmon-colored corset from the 1930s. It wasn't in perfect condition, but it had this intricate stitching and these little metal clasps that were exactly what I needed for my shoot. The price tag was only £15, which seemed like a steal for something that old. The old woman at the counter gave me an odd look when I brought it up. She asked if I was sure I wanted that particular piece. I just thought she was being weird about selling undergarments or something. She wrapped it in brown paper without saying much else. Looking back, I wish I'd asked her more questions. We got back to Rachel's flat around 4 in the afternoon. The sun was already starting to set, and we made tea before I unwrapped my purchase. The corset looked even better in natural light. It had this faded salmon color with tiny embroidered flowers along the seams. Rachel immediately wanted to try it on. "Let me model it for you," she said. "You can see how it photographs before your actual shoot." She put it on over her t-shirt, and I helped lace up the back. It was snug, but it fit her petite frame. I was just tightening the final few laces when something changed. Rachel's entire body went rigid. Her breathing became shallow, rapid. "Take it off," she whispered at first, then louder. "Take it off, take it off." Her voice wasn't just panicked, it was terrified in a way I'd never heard before. I fumbled with the laces, my fingers suddenly clumsy with adrenaline. Rachel was practically hyperventilating, clawing at the front of the corset like it was burning her. When I finally loosened it enough, she ripped it away from her body and kicked it into the corner of the room. She was shaking, gasping for air, her eyes wide and unfocused. "Rach, what happened? Are you okay?" I kept asking, but she just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the corset like it might leap at her. After a few minutes, she calmed down enough to speak, but all she said was, "Don't put that thing on." Of course, being the idiot I am, that just made me more curious. Rachel went to shower. She said she felt dirty all over, and while she was gone, I picked up the corset from where it had landed. It felt heavier than before, but I figured that was just my imagination. I told myself Rachel had just had some kind of panic attack or claustrophobic reaction. The corset was tight after all, so I decided to try it on myself, thinking maybe there was something wrong with how we'd laced it. I stood in front of Rachel's full-length mirror and positioned the corset around my waist. The material felt cold against my skin, even through my thin t-shirt. I fastened the first metal clasp at the bottom. Nothing happened. Second clasp, still nothing. I started to think Rachel had overreacted. Then I fastened the third clasp. The entire room sank. That's the only way I can describe it. Like everything suddenly dropped a foot and then stopped, leaving my stomach floating. The light changed in an instant, not gradually, like the sun going behind clouds, but immediately, as if someone had switched from natural light to a dim yellowish bulb. The temperature plummeted. I felt goosebumps rise on my arms, and my breath came out in a visible puff. Before I could even process what was happening, my body lurched forward involuntarily. Not falling exactly, but like someone had grabbed my consciousness and yanked it out of my body. For a second, I thought I was going to faint. Then I wasn't me anymore. I was looking through someone else's eyes. A woman. I knew that immediately. She was thin, terribly thin. I could feel her ribs under my fingers when she touched her stomach. The corset was on her naked body, digging into her emaciated frame. The rest of her was bare except for heavy iron manacles around her wrists and ankles, connected to chains that scraped against a stone floor covered with dirty straw. The smell hit me next. Human waste, mold, and something else. Something metallic and sickly. Blood. There was blood dried on the inside of her thighs. I could feel her pain, not just physical, but a deep, hollow emptiness where hope should be. I wasn't just seeing these things. I was experiencing them. I felt the rough straw under her feet, the raw skin where the chains had rubbed her ankles raw, the gnawing hunger in her stomach, and worst of all, I felt her memories, flickering through her mind like a broken film reel, rough hands forcing the corset onto her body, tightening it until she couldn't breathe properly. Men's voices laughing, a door slamming, leaving her in darkness. She'd been down there for months, used, hurt, forgotten. The corset was the only clothing they allowed her, a sick joke, a way to make her body look more appealing while I couldn't bear any more. With a desperate effort, I clawed at the clasps of the corset, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely grip them. Unlike Rachel, I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat had closed up completely and tears were streaming down my face. When the last clasp came undone, the room snapped back to normal. The light returned, the temperature rose, and I was me again, standing in Rachel's bedroom, gasping for air. The corset fell to the floor, and I backed away from it, unable to stop shaking. Rachel found me like that, huddled in the corner of her room, as far from the corset as I could get. She knew immediately what had happened. "You put it on, didn't you?" she asked, her voice small. I nodded, still unable to speak. "What did you see?" she asked. It took me several tries to get the words out. A woman, in a basement or dungeon, chained up. The corset was the only thing she was wearing. She was starving, filthy. I couldn't continue. Rachel sat down beside me, her face pale. "I saw her too," she whispered. "What else?" "Chains," I managed to say. Rachel's eyes widened. I only saw one thing clearly: chains. "Did the room drop?" I asked, like the sun collapsed. She nodded slowly. It got dark all at once, cold, like I'd fallen through the floor into somewhere else. We stayed up all night comparing what we'd seen. The details matched perfectly. The straw-covered floor, the damp stone walls, the feeling of starvation and fear. We hadn't just seen similar things. We'd connected to the exact same memory, the same woman, the same horrible story. Who was she? Rachel kept asking. What happened to her? We had no answers. All we knew was that the corset somehow held this woman's trauma, her suffering, her silent scream for help or recognition. The next morning, exhausted and emotionally drained, we cried together for this unknown woman. It sounds strange, but we felt responsible somehow, like we'd been chosen to witness her story. "We can't let anyone else wear it," Rachel said firmly. "That awful, wicked thing shouldn't touch another person's skin." I agreed. Part of me wanted to burn it, but something stopped me, a feeling that destroying it would somehow be disrespectful to the woman who'd suffered in it. Instead, we wrapped it back in the brown paper, placed it in a box, and sealed it with tape. Rachel wrote, "Do not open," in black marker on all sides. We threw it in a dumpster behind a shopping center miles from her flat. Maybe that was cowardly, but we couldn't think of what else to do. We should have brought it to someone who understands these things, maybe, but we were scared and confused and just wanted it gone. It's been 4 months now. Rachel and I don't talk about it much, but sometimes one of us will text the other in the middle of the night. Are you awake? And we know why. The nightmares haven't stopped completely. I've researched the antique center, trying to find information about where the corset might have come from. I even went back once, hoping to talk to the old woman who sold it to me, but she wasn't working that day. The other staff claimed they didn't know which item I was talking about. Their inventory records didn't have any salmon-colored corset listed. I don't know if what we experienced was a ghost, a psychic imprint, or something else entirely. I just know it was real. Two people don't share the exact same hallucination, and sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I can still feel the cold of that stone floor, the weight of those chains, the hopelessness of a woman whose name I'll never know. I keep wondering if she found peace because we acknowledged her suffering. I hope so. I really hope so. Story 12. I've been dealing with this for 3 weeks now, and I'm honestly at my breaking point. I need to get this off my chest because I'm starting to question my own sanity, so I still live at home while I'm finishing college. I'm 21, and I've always felt comfortable in our house despite the occasional weird stuff happening when I was younger. But what's happening now is on a whole different level. It started with my dad, or what I thought was my dad. I was up late studying in my bedroom when I heard footsteps in the hallway. My door was cracked open and I saw my dad walk past. Nothing unusual, right? Except something felt off. The way he moved wasn't quite right. It was jerky, like someone trying to imitate how a person walks but not getting it quite right. I called out, "Dad?" And the footsteps stopped. Then they quickly retreated back down the hall. I got up to check and my dad was sound asleep in his bedroom, had been for hours, according to my mom who was reading beside him. I brushed it off as exhaustion from studying too hard. But then it happened again, 2 nights later, and again 3 days after that. Each time, it looked like my dad walking past my door, but something was always a little wrong. His posture, the rhythm of his steps, or the way his arms swung. I started closing my door at night, but that's when things escalated with my puppy, Benji. Benji is a 4-month-old golden retriever, still clumsy and adorable. Last Friday, I was getting ready for bed around 11:30 when I saw Benji standing in my doorway. I smiled and called him over, but he just stood there, staring at me. His tail wasn't wagging, which was weird because Benji's tail never stops moving. I called him again and he tilted his head at an angle that made my stomach drop. It was too far, like his neck had an extra joint. "Benji," I whispered, and that's when he backed away from the door and disappeared. I immediately went to find the real Benji. I found him curled up next to my mom on the couch in the living room, fast asleep. My mom confirmed he'd been with her the whole time. I didn't sleep that night. I left all my lights on and kept checking my doorway. The next night, I decided to test something. When I saw Benji in my doorway again, standing completely still with that unnatural head tilt, I pretended not to notice. I hid behind my jewelry holder, watching him through my mirror. In the reflection, I could see him slowly inching into my room, moving in a way that Benji never would. It was like watching a stop-motion animation of a dog, all wrong and jerky. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. When I glanced back at the mirror, the reflection showed Benji right beside my bed. But when I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. I nearly screamed. Then I felt something brush against my leg. I jumped up and ran out of my room. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I went to the kitchen for water, trying to calm down, and there was the real Benji, still with my mom, watching TV. He barked happily when he saw me, completely normal. That's when I started thinking there might be multiple entities in our house. See, I've always sensed a presence in our home since I was a kid, but it never felt threatening, more like a mischievous roommate. When I was 12, food would sometimes fly off my plate during dinner. The first time it happened, a piece of broccoli just launched itself across the table. My parents thought I was acting out, but I wasn't touching it. It happened several times that year, always when I was eating alone or when no one was looking directly at me. At the time, I found it annoying. But now I wonder if whatever was throwing my food was trying to help me in some way. Another time, when I was 15, I was crying under my blanket after a terrible day at school. I felt my bed sink down like someone had sat next to me, and then something started gently patting my back. I assumed it was my brother coming to check on me, so I said, "Thanks, I'm okay." That's when I heard my brother's voice from across the room saying, "What are you talking about? I'm over here playing Fortnite." I froze, but didn't feel scared. Whatever was patting my back kept doing it for another minute. Then the weight lifted, and the bed returned to normal. That feeling of the bed dipping became common over the years. It would happen when I was sad or anxious, and honestly, it was comforting. I came to see it as a friendly presence. But this thing mimicking my family members feels different. Hostile. Wrong. Last Tuesday, I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I heard my mom call me from the kitchen. "Honey, can you come help me with something?" I rinsed my mouth and headed downstairs, but the kitchen was empty. I called out for my mom, and she answered from the basement where she was doing laundry. She hadn't called me at all. On Thursday, I was home alone when I heard the front door open and my brother shouting, "I'm home!" I yelled back, asking how his exam went. No response. When I went to check, no one was there and the door was still locked. My brother texted me 20 minutes later saying he was still on campus. Yesterday was the worst. I was in my room doing homework when my bedroom door creaked open. My mom peeked in and asked if I wanted some tea. I said sure and kept working. About 10 minutes later, she came back with a steaming mug. She set it on my desk without saying anything and left. I took a sip. It was peppermint, my favorite. I was almost done with my assignment when my actual mom knocked on my door and asked if I wanted to watch a movie with her. I stared at her, then at the empty mug on my desk. "Didn't you just bring me tea?" She looked confused. "No, I've been on a work call for the last hour." I felt sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. Whatever that tea was, it wasn't made by my mother. Last night, I decided to set up my phone to record my room while I slept. I propped it up on my bookshelf, hit record, and tried to get some rest. I tossed and turned for hours before finally drifting off around 2 in the morning. When I woke up, I immediately checked the recording. For the first few hours, there was nothing, just me sleeping. But at 4:27, there was movement near my door. The video was dark, but I could make out a shape that looked like Benji. It stood in my doorway for almost 10 minutes without moving. Then it slowly, too slowly, started to come into my room. As it got closer to my bed, I could see it wasn't quite right. Its proportions were off. Legs too long, head too square. It reached the side of my bed and just watched me. After several minutes, it leaned in close to my face. That's when the video glitched. When the image cleared, the thing was gone. But that's not the weirdest part. As I was reviewing the footage, I noticed something else in the corner of my room, a faint human-shaped shadow that wasn't cast by anything. It seemed to be watching the Benji thing. When the mimic leaned toward me, the shadow moved quickly toward it. That's when the video glitched. I've been thinking about this all day. What if the presence I've felt since childhood, the one that throws food and sits on my bed, is trying to protect me from this mimic? What if they're two separate entities? About an hour ago, I was sitting on my bed trying to make sense of all this when I heard scratching at my door. I ignored it, but it got louder and more frantic. Then I heard whimpering, just like Benji does when he wants attention. I knew better than to open the door. The scratching stopped suddenly, and I heard a thud against the wall outside my room, like something had been thrown. Then footsteps running away. I waited 5 minutes before opening my door. In the hallway was one of Benji's toys, a small rubber ball he loves to chase. The real Benji was downstairs with my parents the whole time. I'm sitting here now, door locked, jumping at every sound. I don't know what to do. I'm scared to tell my family because they'll think I'm crazy. I'm scared to stay here, but I have nowhere else to go. I just heard my name being whispered from inside my closet. I'm not going to look. I'm not going to look. I'm not going to. Story 13. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. Part of me wants to forget it ever happened, but another part needs someone else to know. I can't talk to my parents about it, they just tell me I'm being dramatic. And the police, well, they didn't exactly take us seriously. So here goes. This happened back in September when I was starting my second year at Everlake College. It's this small school, tucked away in a town that most people have never heard of. The campus is pretty, surrounded by these massive woods that stretch for miles around a large lake. Most students hang out by the water on weekends, but almost nobody ventures deep into the forest. I should have listened to my grandmother. She grew up in Everlake and always had these weird rules about the woods. Stay near the lake, she'd tell me whenever I visited. Don't go too deep after dark, the woods listen. I used to roll my eyes thinking it was just old people superstition. God, I wish I'd taken her seriously. My friends and I, Jamie, Ryan, and Liz, had been planning this camping trip since the semester started. We weren't hardcore outdoorsy types or anything, just bored college students looking for something different to do on a weekend. Jamie suggested we hike into the woods rather than stay at the designated campgrounds by the lake like everyone else. It would be more of an adventure, he said. The day started out perfectly normal. We met up around noon outside my dorm, backpacks loaded with the essentials: tent, sleeping bags, food, a couple of six-packs. The weather was ideal, not too hot, with a slight breeze. As we headed toward the trailhead, I remember feeling this weird knot in my stomach. I brushed it off as excitement. The hike was beautiful at first. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating these dappled patterns on the ground. We took a bunch of photos, laughed about stupid inside jokes, talked about classes, normal stuff. The further we went, though, the denser the trees became. After about 2 hours of hiking, we found this small clearing that seemed perfect for setting up camp. Ryan and Jamie got the tent up, while Liz and I gathered wood for a fire. I remember Liz commenting on how quiet it was, and she was right. There were no bird calls, no rustling in the underbrush, just this weird, heavy silence that seemed to press down on us. I mentioned my grandmother's warnings as a joke, and everyone laughed it off, even me. By sunset, we had a decent fire going and were sitting around it, drinking beers and roasting marshmallows. The woods had gotten even quieter, if that was possible. No crickets, no frogs, nothing, just the crackling of our fire. That's when I first got the feeling we were being watched. It wasn't obvious at first, just this prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something, but there was only darkness beyond our little circle of light. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to freak everyone out over what was probably nothing. Around 10 o'clock, Liz said she needed to pee and walked just beyond the firelight. We could still see her silhouette as she moved behind a large tree. Jamie was in the middle of telling some stupid story about his economics professor when we realized Liz had been gone too long. "Liz," I called out. "Nothing." Ryan stood up, shining his flashlight toward where she'd gone. "Liz, you okay?" Still nothing. We all got up then, grabbing our phones for extra light. Her stuff was still there, her jacket draped over her camping chair, her beer half empty beside it. But Liz was gone. "She's probably just messing with us," Jamie said, but his voice had this edge to it that told me he didn't believe that. We spread out a little, still within sight of the fire, calling her name. That's when I heard it. My name, whispered from somewhere in the darkness. Sarah. It didn't sound like Liz. It didn't sound human. The voice was all wrong, too hollow, too empty. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. For a split second, I saw movement at the edge of the light, something tall and thin slipping behind a tree. My heart practically stopped. "Guys," I said, my voice shaking, "I think we need to go back to camp." When we got back to the fire, Jamie and Ryan were pale. They'd seen things too, shapes moving just beyond where their lights could reach, strange rustling noises that stopped whenever they turned toward them. "We need to find Liz and get the hell out of here," Ryan said, already starting to pack up his stuff. I was shoving my sleeping bag into my backpack when Jamie suddenly froze, staring into the darkness beyond our camp. "Guys," he whispered, "look." At the edge of our firelight stood Liz. Relief flooded through me for about half a second before I realized something was wrong. She was just standing there, completely still, facing away from us. "Liz," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. "You okay?" She didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, rigid, like she was listening for something. Ryan took a step toward her. "Liz, come on, we're leaving." That's when she turned around. God, I still see her face in my nightmares. It wasn't Liz anymore. I mean, it was her body, but her face, her eyes, were just empty black holes, like someone had scooped out everything behind them. Her skin was nearly transparent, with dark veins visible underneath. And her mouth, it was stretched into this horrible, unnatural smile that was too wide for her face. I screamed. I couldn't help it. Jamie grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward the tent. That's when we saw them. Dozens of figures emerging from the trees behind Liz, all with the same hollow eyes and twisted smiles. They moved in this jerky, unnatural way, like puppets being controlled by someone who didn't quite understand how bodies work. We ran, grabbed whatever we could and just ran. I don't remember consciously deciding which direction to go. We just needed to get away from those things. The forest was pitch black, and our flashlights barely cut through the darkness. Branches whipped at my face. Roots tried to trip me. I could hear Jamie and Ryan crashing through the underbrush beside me and behind us. Whispers. So many whispers, all saying our names in that same hollow voice I'd heard earlier. Sarah. Jamie. Ryan. Over and over, getting closer. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. They were following us, moving impossibly fast through the trees, and at the front was Liz, or whatever was wearing Liz's body. We ran for what felt like hours. The forest seemed to shift around us, paths appearing and disappearing, trees moving when we weren't looking directly at them. Several times we found ourselves doubling back, somehow ending up in places we'd already passed through. It was like the woods were playing with us, deliberately keeping us lost. My lungs were burning, my legs screaming with pain, but the whispers kept me running. They were always just behind us, never quite catching up, but never falling behind either. Then Ryan spotted water through the trees. The lake. We sprinted toward it, breaking through the tree line onto the rocky shore. I collapsed onto the pebbles, gasping for breath, expecting those things to burst out of the woods at any second. But they didn't. The whispers stopped at the edge of the forest. We looked back and saw them, dozens of dark figures standing just within the tree line, their hollow eyes reflecting our flashlight beams. They didn't step onto the shore, they just watched. For several minutes, none of us moved. Then, one by one, the figures retreated back into the darkness until only Liz remained. She stood there for a long moment, that terrible smile still stretched across her face. Then she turned and walked into the trees, disappearing from sight. We stayed on that shore until dawn, too terrified to move. When the sun finally rose, we followed the lakeshore back to campus and went straight to the police. They searched the woods for days but found nothing. Not Liz, not our abandoned campsite, nothing. They eventually ruled it as Liz wandering off and getting lost, probably fallen into a ravine or something. Her parents were devastated. It's been 3 months now. Jamie and Ryan won't talk about what happened. They avoid me on campus, and neither of them will go anywhere near the woods. I don't blame them. I'm transferring to a different college next semester somewhere far away from Everlake. I still can't sleep with the lights off. Every time I close my eyes, I see those hollow-eyed figures emerging from the trees. Sometimes I think I hear whispers in my room at night, saying my name in that empty voice. The worst part is, I keep having this recurring nightmare where I'm back in those woods, but this time I'm one of them. I'm standing at the edge of a campfire, watching some other group of students, and my face is stretched into that same horrible smile. My grandmother was right. The woods do listen. They took Liz, and sometimes I can't shake the feeling that they're not done with us yet, that someday they'll come for the rest of us too. Story 14. I've been trying to figure out how to write this for weeks. I keep typing it out and deleting everything because it sounds crazy even to me. I've never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural, but after 7 years of this, I don't know what else to call what's happening in our house. We moved into this council house when I was 20. My family wasn't thrilled about the place initially. We'd heard the previous tenants were evicted for trashing it. The housing officer was upfront about it needing a bit of work, which was the understatement of the century. There were holes punched in some walls, carpet stains everywhere, and this lingering smell I can't even describe. But beggars can't be choosers, right? The rent was within our budget and we needed a place fast. The first week was just cleaning and making it livable. I remember my mom scrubbing the kitchen floors for hours while my sister and I painted over the marks on the walls. Dad fixed the cabinet doors that were hanging off their hinges. Normal stuff when you move into a place that's been neglected. It was probably day 10 when I noticed the first weird thing. I was in my bedroom unpacking the last of my stuff when I hit this pocket of air so cold it made me gasp. It was August, and we didn't have air conditioning. The rest of the room was stuffy and warm, but this one spot by my closet was freezing. I actually stuck my hand in and out of it a few times, trying to figure out if there was some kind of draft. There wasn't. It was just cold for no reason. I didn't think much of it then. Old houses have quirks, right? A couple weeks later, I couldn't find my PlayStation controller. I tore my room apart looking for it. I checked under the bed, in the drawers, even in the kitchen, thinking maybe I'd taken it there. Nothing. My sister got annoyed with me asking if she'd seen it. My parents suggested I was being careless. A week later, I walked into my room after dinner, and there it was, sitting in the middle of my bed, just there, on top of my blanket where I absolutely would have noticed it before. When I mentioned it to my family, my sister got this look on her face and said her favorite necklace had disappeared too. She'd looked everywhere for it. 3 weeks later, she found it hanging from her bedside lamp. She swore up and down she'd checked that lamp multiple times. We started keeping a list after that. Mom's reading glasses, Dad's watch, my headphones, all vanishing for days or weeks at a time before showing up in obvious places we'd already searched, places you couldn't miss. The cold spots kept happening too, not just in my room anymore, but all over the house. You'd be walking down the hallway and suddenly hit this wall of cold air that made your skin prickle. Sometimes they'd move, like you'd feel it on your left side, and then suddenly it would be on your right. And the smells, those were the weirdest. Sometimes you'd catch this whiff of perfume like something floral and old-fashioned. Other times it was more like, I don't know how to describe it except maybe like wet soil. Not exactly pleasant, but not horrible either. Just strange because there was no source for it. We got used to it, I guess. You can get used to anything if it happens enough. We'd joke about the borrower when things went missing. The borrower must have my phone charger again, that kind of thing. It became our normal. Then about 2 weeks ago, things escalated. My sister came downstairs one morning looking like she hadn't slept. She said she'd heard footsteps in her room all night. Not like someone walking around, but like someone pacing back and forth at the foot of her bed. She said she kept turning on her light, but nobody was there. She also said her jewelry box had been moved from her dresser to her desk, and she was certain she hadn't touched it. I believed her because at that point, why wouldn't I? We'd all experienced enough weird stuff that it seemed plausible. The next day, my mom was in the kitchen making dinner when she saw something that finally broke our collective denial. She came running into the living room white as a sheet, hands shaking. She said she'd seen a woman walk out of the living room and into the hallway. Not like a shadow or something in the corner of her eye. A full-on person. She described her as young, maybe in her 20s, with long dark hair. My mum said she was solid enough that at first she thought someone had broken in, but then the woman just wasn't there anymore when my mom followed her into the hall. That night was when it happened to me. I was in bed watching YouTube videos on my laptop. It was around 1 in the morning and everyone else was asleep. I had my headphones on, but I kept feeling like someone was watching me. You know that feeling, right? When the hair on the back of your neck stands up? I kept pausing my video and looking around, but my room was empty. Then I smelled hair. Not like shampoo, but actual hair, like when someone's lying right behind you and their hair is near your face. I froze. I could feel the mattress dipping slightly behind me, like there was weight on it. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. I just sat there staring at my laptop screen that had gone dark from inactivity, seeing my own terrified reflection. I don't know how long I stayed like that, maybe minutes, maybe longer. Eventually, I managed to turn my head, inch by inch, to look behind me. There was nothing there. No visible person at least, but the feeling of someone's presence didn't go away. I felt it move from behind me to the foot of my bed. I could almost see the outline of someone standing there watching me, but when I blinked or tried to focus, there was nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I kept all the lights on and played loud music through my headphones until sunrise. I was too scared to leave my room to wake anyone up. At breakfast the next morning, we all looked like hell. No one had slept well. Without me saying anything, my dad mentioned he'd felt like someone was in the house all night, moving from room to room. That's when we finally had the talk, the one where we admitted out loud that our house might be haunted. It sounds so ridiculous typing it out like this. If someone had told me this story 7 years ago, I'd have laughed in their face. But living through it, it's different. It's real. Since that night, things have been more obvious. We all see shadows moving in our peripheral vision now. The cold spots are more frequent and intense, sometimes so cold your teeth chatter if you stand in one too long. We hear footsteps when no one's walking, doors closing when no one's touched them. Last week, my mum's coffee mug slid across the kitchen counter while we were all watching. Just slid, like someone had pushed it. We've started researching the history of the house, trying to figure out who might be haunting us. The council doesn't have much information, but our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patel, has lived on the street for decades. She told us something that made my skin crawl. Apparently, our house and the one attached to ours, it's a semi-detached, have had strange occurrences for years. The house next door seems to have the worst luck, according to Mrs. Patel, the first tenant she knew of, committed suicide in the bathroom. The next tenant was supposedly killed by a drug dealer right on the front step. The current neighbor is an elderly man who lost his leg to an infection shortly after moving in. She said people in the neighborhood call the two houses the cursed pair. What's strange is that we've kind of accepted it. I know that sounds weird. Maybe we're just trying to cope. But we've started acknowledging the presence openly. Like if something goes missing, my mom will say out loud, "We need that back when you're done with it, please." And usually the item returns within a day or two after that. My sister even named it. She calls it Ellis for no particular reason, except she said the name popped into her head one day. We'll be sitting watching TV and one of us will feel that cold spot and just say, "Ellis is here." We joke that we're just coexisting with a ghost now. I sometimes worry that maybe we shouldn't be so casual about it. What if Ellis doesn't like being treated like a roommate? What if the jokes make it angry? But so far, nothing malicious has happened. It feels more like curiosity than anything threatening. It's just there, watching, sometimes borrowing our stuff, moving things around. Last night I was alone in the house while everyone was out shopping. I felt that familiar presence in my room again. The cold spot was by my desk this time. I actually said out loud, "I know you're there. It's okay. You can stay as long as you don't scare me." The cold intensified for a moment, almost like an acknowledgement, and then faded away. I still don't know what to make of all this. I don't know if Ellis is the spirit of someone who died here, or something else entirely. I don't know why our house and the one next door seem to have this dark cloud over them. All I know is that after 7 years, this is our reality now. We live with something we can't see or understand, but that is undeniably present. Sometimes I wonder if it was here before us, watching the previous tenants destroy the place. Sometimes I wonder if it will be here long after we're gone. And sometimes, in the middle of the night when I feel that weight at the end of my bed and smell that distinctive hair scent, I wonder if it's trying to tell us something that we're just not understanding. Story 15. I've been driving truck for almost 23 years now, coast to coast, border to border. I've seen just about everything you can imagine on America's highways. Weather that'll make your hair stand on end, accidents that'll haunt you for life, and enough strange fellow travelers to fill a book. But what happened to me last November on I-80 between Denver and San Francisco, I still can't explain it. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I don't normally share personal stuff online, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it. It was a Tuesday night, unseasonably cold for November, the kind of night where the air feels brittle, like it might snap if you move too quickly. I remember checking the weather before setting out from Denver, surprised to see the temperature hovering around 20 degrees. My cargo was time-sensitive electronics heading to a distribution center in the Bay Area. Nothing unusual. What was unusual was how empty the roads were. I-80 is typically busy with traffic, even at night, but that evening it was eerily quiet. By the time I hit the Utah border, I hadn't passed more than a handful of vehicles in over an hour. The moon was almost full, casting an eerie bluish glow across the landscape, making the desert look like some alien terrain. I remember glancing at my dashboard clock. It was exactly 11:37 p.m. I only remember because I was calculating when I should stop for my mandatory break. The radio was playing some classic rock station that kept fading in and out. I finally gave up and switched it off, preferring the hum of my engine to the static. That's when I first noticed the lights ahead. At first, I thought it was just the usual traffic, maybe some fellow truckers making the overnight haul, but something about the way the lights moved caught my attention. They didn't seem to bounce with the road like normal headlights do. Instead, they sort of floated, maintaining a perfectly level path despite the uneven terrain. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just tired and seeing things, but no, the lights were definitely behaving strangely. They were also moving unusually slow, maybe 40 miles per hour in a 75 zone. As I got closer, I could make out that it was a convoy of trucks, 4 or 5 of them traveling in perfect formation. My first thought was that maybe it was a military convoy or something being transported under special conditions. But there were no escort vehicles, no flashing lights, nothing to indicate an official transport. When I got within about half a mile, I noticed something else odd. None of the trucks had any company logos or markings. Most commercial vehicles are plastered with company names, DOT numbers, all that stuff. These were just plain, dull, gray metal that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. I radioed to see if anyone was out there, but got nothing but static in response. By now, my curiosity was getting the better of me, so I decided to pass them. I moved into the left lane and accelerated. As I pulled alongside the rear truck, I felt a sudden cold draft in my cab, even though all my windows were up and the heater was blasting. The truck itself looked wrong. The metal was rusted in places, with a patina that suggested decades of neglect, not something that should be roadworthy. The tires looked worn and cracked, and the windows were so dirty I couldn't see inside. I continued past the second truck, then the third, all in the same condition, derelict vehicles that had no business being on the road. Then I pulled alongside the lead truck, and that's when the real fear hit me. I glanced over, expecting to see another driver, maybe give a friendly wave as truckers often do, but there was no one there. The cab was empty. I blinked hard, certain I was hallucinating from fatigue. I looked again. Still empty. No driver. I checked the other trucks in my mirrors, all empty. Yet they continued moving in perfect unison, maintaining their lane and speed as precisely as if they were being driven by the world's most skilled drivers. My heart was hammering in my chest now. I hit the gas harder, wanting to put distance between myself and whatever the hell this was. As I passed the lead truck, I caught a glimpse of its license plate, faded numbers on a peculiar background that reminded me of government vehicles from decades ago, like something from the 70s. Once I was about a quarter mile ahead, I glanced in my rearview mirror, expecting to see their headlights following me. But there was nothing, just empty, dark highway stretching back as far as I could see. I nearly swerved off the road in shock. There was nowhere those trucks could have gone. No exits, no turn-offs, nothing. They had simply vanished. I white-knuckled the steering wheel for the next 50 miles, afraid to stop, afraid to even slow down. My mind was racing with explanations. I was overtired, I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing. Maybe there was carbon monoxide leaking into my cab. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. When I finally reached the truck stop in Elko, Nevada, I was shaking so badly I could barely park. I went inside, desperate for coffee and human contact. The place was nearly empty except for a waitress wiping down counters and an old guy nursing a cup of coffee in the corner. The waitress, her name tag said Linda, must have seen the state I was in. She poured me a coffee without me asking and slid it across the counter. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, concern in her eyes. I laughed nervously. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "Try me. Was it the trucks?" My blood ran cold. "How did you know?" Linda sighed, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "We call them the silent convoy. They show up from time to time, always at night, always on the same stretch of I-80. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What are they?" She shook her head. "No one knows for sure. Some say they're the ghosts of truckers who never made it to their destinations. Others think there's something dark out in the desert that trapped them, keeping them on an eternal journey." "But there were no drivers," I said, still struggling to process what I'd seen. "There never are," she replied quietly. "Listen, I've worked this stop for 15 years. I've heard this story more times than I can count. But here's the thing. Not everyone who sees the convoy comes in to tell about it." My mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" "I mean some truckers who report seeing those trucks. They disappear, never make it to their destinations. Their rigs are found abandoned on the shoulder, engines still running, no sign of the drivers." I felt sick to my stomach. "So what am I supposed to do if I see them again?" Linda's eyes were dead serious. "Don't follow them. Don't pass them. Just pull over and wait until they're gone. Promise me." I nodded, though at that moment I couldn't imagine ever getting back on I-80, let alone encountering those trucks again. I sat there for nearly 2 hours, drinking coffee until my hands stopped shaking. Linda didn't press me for more details, just kept my cup filled and occasionally gave me a sympathetic look. I was grateful for that. When I finally worked up the courage to continue my journey, the sky was beginning to lighten. Dawn was still a couple hours away, but that grayish pre-dawn light was starting to creep over the horizon. I figured daylight would keep the convoy, whatever it was, at bay. As I climbed back into my rig, Linda called out to me, "Be careful out there, and if you ever see them again, well, just remember what I said." The rest of my journey to San Francisco was uneventful. The highway behind me remained empty, and I kept checking my mirrors obsessively, half expecting to see those ghostly headlights materialize out of nowhere. They never did, but that didn't stop the cold sweat from breaking out every time I saw headlights of any kind approaching. I delivered my cargo on time, but I was a wreck. I took a few days off in San Francisco before my next haul, trying to make sense of what had happened. I researched online, looking for any information about ghost trucks or the silent convoy. I found a few forum posts from other truckers describing similar experiences on I-80, but nothing conclusive. One post stood out. A trucker claimed that back in the 70s, a convoy of experimental military vehicles had disappeared in that exact area during a classified transport operation. According to this story, the vehicles were carrying some kind of hazardous material, and the government covered up the whole incident. I have no idea if there's any truth to it, but it's the only explanation that's even remotely plausible. It's been 4 months since that night. I've made the Denver to San Francisco run twice more since then, but I take different routes now, even though it adds hours to my journey. I just can't bring myself to drive that stretch of I-80 at night again. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, alone on some empty highway, I'll catch a glimpse of something in my mirror that sends my heart racing. So far, it's always been nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me. but I can't shake the feeling that the silent convoy is still out there, moving along America's highways under the cover of darkness. And sometimes in my nightmares, I see those empty cabs again, only this time there's someone, or something, sitting behind the wheel, turning to look at me as I pass, and it has my face. I don't know what I encountered that night. I don't know if they were ghosts, hallucinations, or something else entirely. But I know what I saw, and I know the fear I felt was real. Whatever the silent convoy is, I hope to God I never see it again. And if you're driving I-80 at night and see strange lights ahead moving too smoothly, too slowly, remember Linda's advice. Don't follow, don't pass, just pull over and wait until they're gone. Because I can't shake the feeling that one day they might come back for me. And next time there might be an empty seat in that convoy waiting for a new driver. Atsasinda. Story 16. I still can't explain what happened to me last month. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, trying to find some logical explanation, but I can't. I'm sharing this because I need to get it out, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of it. I was driving back from my cousin's wedding in Portland. It was supposed to be a straightforward 8-hour drive home, but everything that could go wrong did. My GPS died about 3 hours in, and I got completely turned around trying to follow road signs. Then the rain started, not just a drizzle, but one of those downpours where your wipers can barely keep up and you're hunched forward, squinting just to make out the road ahead. By 11 at night, I'd been driving for almost 10 hours. My eyes were burning, my back was stiff, and I kept catching myself nodding off. I knew I needed to stop soon or I'd end up driving off the road. The problem was I had no idea where I was. I'd ended up on some narrow 2-lane highway cutting through dense forest. No streetlights, no gas stations, no signs of civilization, just my headlights cutting through the darkness and rain drumming on my roof. Just when I was starting to panic about having to pull over and sleep in my car, I saw it, a flickering neon sign in the distance. As I got closer, I could make out the words, "The Last Stop Motel," in faded red letters, with a vacancy sign below it that buzzed and flickered every few seconds. I nearly cried with relief. I turned onto the gravel driveway, my tires crunching over the rocks. The place looked exactly like you'd expect from a middle-of-nowhere motel. A single-story building with maybe 15 rooms in a row, paint peeling off the wooden siding, and rust stains running down from the gutters. But at that point, I wouldn't have cared if it was a literal hole in the ground as long as it was dry and had a bed. I parked in front of the office, grabbing my overnight bag from the back seat before making a run for it through the rain. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door, and the smell hit me immediately. Musty carpet, cigarette smoke, and something else I couldn't quite place, like old food, or maybe mildew. The office was tiny, just a counter with the ancient-looking guest book on it, a wall of keys behind, and a sad little sitting area with magazines that looked at least a decade old. No one was there, so I called out, "Hello." My voice sounded strange, like it was being swallowed up by the room. After a moment, a door behind the counter opened and a man stepped out. He was tall and thin, almost unnaturally so, with arms that seemed too long for his body. His face was deeply lined, with hollow cheeks and dark circles under his eyes that made him look like he hadn't slept in years. He didn't smile or greet me, just stared with these pale blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. "I need a room for the night," I said, reaching for my wallet. "Just one night." The man nodded slowly but didn't say anything. He turned to the wall of keys behind him, his movements stiff and deliberate, and took down a key with a plastic tag marked 13 in faded numbers. "How much do I owe you?" I asked, pulling out my credit card. He just shook his head and pushed the key across the counter toward me. "End of the row," he said, his voice a dry whisper that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Last room." I stood there awkwardly for a moment, waiting for him to ask for payment or ID or have me fill out some kind of form, but he just stared at me with those empty eyes. Something told me not to ask questions, so I just took the key and thanked him. The rain had gotten even heavier as I dashed back to my car and drove down to the end of the row. Room 13 was the last one, just like he'd said, separated from the others by what looked like an empty room. The number on the door was crooked, the bottom of the 3 hanging loose like it might fall off at any moment. The key stuck in the lock, and I had to jiggle it a few times before the door finally swung open with a creak that set my teeth on edge. I fumbled for the light switch, and a dim yellow bulb buzzed to life overhead, revealing a room that made my stomach sink. It wasn't just old or outdated. It felt wrong somehow. The walls were covered in yellowed wallpaper that was peeling at the seams. The carpet was a dingy brown with stains I didn't want to think about. There was a double bed with a sagging middle, a rickety nightstand, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and a door that I assumed led to the bathroom. The whole place smelled musty and stale, like it had been closed up for years. But I was so exhausted that I told myself it was just for one night. I'd sleep, get up early, and be on my way. I dropped my bag on the floor, locked the door, adding the security chain for good measure, and headed straight for the bathroom. The bathroom was just as depressing as the main room. Cracked tiles, a rust-stained sink, and a shower with a curtain that had once been white but was now a sickly yellow. I splashed some water on my face, trying not to look too closely at the brownish water that first came out of the tap, and used my own towel from my bag to dry off. When I came out of the bathroom, the room felt different, colder. I checked the window to see if it was open, but it was firmly shut with no obvious drafts. Yet there was this chill in the air that seemed to seep into my bones. I cranked up the ancient heater under the window, but it just made a rattling sound and pumped out a burning smell with no actual heat. I was too tired to care. I kicked off my shoes, pulled back the bedspread, no way was I sleeping under that, and lay down on top of the sheets in my clothes. I was so exhausted that I expected to pass out immediately, but something kept me awake. There was a heaviness to the air, like the pressure before a storm, and an unnatural stillness that made every little sound seem amplified. And then I heard it, a soft tapping sound, so faint at first that I thought I was imagining it. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the direction of the door. I froze, listening intently as the tapping continued, growing slightly louder and more insistent. Tap, 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 tap. I sat up slowly, my heart starting to race. Was someone at the door, a late-night traveler looking for a room, the manager with some paperwork I needed to fill out after all? I got up and approached the door cautiously, listening to the tapping that continued in its steady rhythm. Looking through the peephole, I could see nothing but darkness, no person, no movement, just the empty walkway and parking lot beyond, dimly lit by the flickering neon sign in the distance. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain. No response, just the continuous tapping. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and opened it a crack, chain still in place. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and there was no one there, just my car sitting alone in the parking lot and the swaying trees in the distance. The tapping had stopped the moment I opened the door. I closed and locked it again, telling myself it must have been a branch hitting the building, or just the old structure settling. But as soon as I turned away from the door, the tapping started again, except this time, it wasn't coming from the door, it was coming from inside the room. Tap, 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 tap. I spun around, trying to locate the source. It seemed to be coming from the nightstand by the bed. My mouth went dry as I slowly approached it, the tapping growing louder with each step I took. Tap, 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 tap. With a trembling hand, I reached for the small drawer in the nightstand and pulled it open. It was empty, completely empty. Not even a Gideon Bible or a forgotten pen, just dusty wood, and yet the tapping continued, now seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And then behind me the bed creaked. I turned around slowly, my whole body rigid with fear. There, sitting on the edge of the bed where I had been lying moments before, was the outline of a figure. It wasn't solid, more like a shadow or a distortion in the air, but unmistakably person-shaped. As I watched, frozen in place, it slowly stood up. It had no distinct features that I could make out, just a dark, hazy silhouette roughly the shape of a person. But something about it was deeply, fundamentally wrong. It seemed to absorb the light around it, creating a void in the shape of a human, and then it started moving toward me. I don't remember consciously deciding to run. One moment I was standing there, and the next I was fumbling with the locks on the door, my fingers clumsy with terror. I could feel it getting closer, the air around me growing colder with each inch it advanced. The chain caught for a heart-stopping moment before finally sliding free. I wrenched the door open and bolted into the rain, not even bothering to close it behind me. My only thought was to get to my car. I slammed into the driver's side door, yanked it open, and threw myself inside. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped the keys twice before managing to get them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I reversed so quickly that my tires spun on the wet gravel. As I turned the car around, my headlights swept across the front of room 13. The door was still open, a rectangle of yellow light spilling out into the night, and for just a second, I thought I saw a figure standing in the doorway. Not the shadowy outline from the room, but the tall, gaunt manager, watching me with those empty eyes. I didn't look back as I sped down the driveway and back onto the highway, driving well above the speed limit, despite the rain and the dark. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, where I pulled into the parking lot of a brightly lit 24-hour diner and sat there, shaking for what felt like hours. I ended up sleeping in my car that night, too afraid to try another motel. When morning came, I decided to drive back in daylight, convinced that there must be a rational explanation for what had happened. It took me a while to find the right stretch of highway. In the light of day, everything looked different, and I wasn't even sure I was on the same road. But then I recognized a distinctive curve in the road and a large, dead tree that I remembered passing just before finding the motel. I slowed down, looking for the gravel driveway and the neon sign, but there was nothing there, just an empty, overgrown lot with tall grass and a few concrete foundations barely visible among the weeds. It looked like nothing had stood there for decades. I pulled over and got out, walking around the lot in disbelief. There were no signs of recent construction or demolition, no indication that a motel had been there just hours before. It was as if the last stop motel had never existed. As I walked back to my car, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time as I pulled away, and for just a split second, I swear, I saw the faded neon sign flicker once in the empty lot before vanishing completely. I still have the key. It's sitting on my desk as I write this, its plastic tag still clearly marked 13, the only proof I have that I didn't imagine the whole thing. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if the motel was ever really there, or what that shadow on the bed was, or why the manager gave me a room without taking payment. All I know is that I'll never drive that highway again, especially not at night, and if I ever see a flickering neon sign for the last stop motel, I'll keep driving no matter how tired I am. Story 17. I still can't explain what happened that night 6 months ago. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times, tried to rationalize it, but nothing makes sense. I need to get this off my chest because it's eating me alive. I work as a ticket collector for the railway system. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. That particular day in October started like any other. Checking tickets, dealing with the occasional difficult passenger, nothing out of the ordinary. I was working the late shift, which meant I'd be arriving at Millfield Junction around 10 in the evening. It's a small town, more of a glorified village really, but it's an important railway junction where several lines meet. By the time my shift ended, I was absolutely craving a cigarette. I'm a pack-a-day smoker, and I'd run out halfway through my shift. 8 hours on a train checking tickets is stressful enough, but doing it without a smoke break was torture. I couldn't wait to change out of my uniform, grab some cigarettes, and collapse in the small room the railway provides for staff who need to stay overnight between shifts. After changing out of my uniform in the staff room, I headed out into the town. It was around 10:15 by then, and I was surprised to find everything closed. Now, Millfield isn't exactly a bustling metropolis, but it's a junction station. There are always passengers coming and going at all hours. I figured at least one shop would be open where I could grab some smokes. I started walking from the station into the town center, thinking surely I'd find something open. The streets were eerily quiet, just the occasional car passing by. No pedestrians, no open shops, nothing. I walked for what felt like forever, following the main road through town, checking every small convenience store and newsagent I passed, all closed, with their metal shutters down. By midnight, I was getting genuinely annoyed. I'd been walking for nearly 2 hours and hadn't found a single open shop. My phone battery was almost dead, so I couldn't even Google anything. I decided to expand my search, taking side streets and working my way through residential areas, thinking maybe there was some 24-hour petrol station on the outskirts I didn't know about. The further I walked, the more disoriented I became. Millfield isn't that big, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 people, but that night it felt like an endless maze. Every time I thought I was heading back toward the station, I'd find myself in some unfamiliar neighborhood. The streets were completely deserted, and there was this unsettling silence everywhere. Not even dogs barking or the usual night sounds you'd expect. By 2 in the morning, I was exhausted and seriously pissed off. I'd been walking for nearly 4 hours without finding a single open shop. My feet were killing me, and I estimated I'd walked at least 5 or 6 kilometers in total. I decided to give up and head back to the station to get some sleep. I just have to wait until morning for my cigarettes. That's when I saw them. I was on a dimly lit residential street when I spotted an elderly couple walking about 30 meters ahead of me. They were moving slowly, the man carrying what looked like a small suitcase, the woman holding the hands of 2 children. Behind them trailed a teenage boy with another bag. The sight of other people after hours of empty streets was such a relief that I picked up my pace to catch up with them. "Excuse me," I called out, not wanting to startle them by suddenly appearing behind them in the dark. They stopped and turned around. The elderly man looked to be in his 70s with a kind face and thinning white hair. His wife seemed about the same age, wearing a floral headscarf and a heavy coat, despite it not being particularly cold. "Hello there," the old man said, smiling warmly. "Are you lost too?" I explained that I was a ticket collector who'd arrived earlier that evening and had spent hours looking for somewhere to buy cigarettes. They both chuckled at this, which I found slightly odd at the time. "We're heading to the station," the woman said. "We've been visiting my sister and her family, and we have a train to catch at 3:45. "That's where I'm headed too," I said, relieved to have found someone who knew the way. "Mind if I walk with you?" "Not at all," the man replied. "Could you give me a hand with this bag? My arthritis is playing up something terrible tonight." I took the suitcase from him, surprised at how heavy it was. The teenage boy nodded at me but didn't speak. The 2 younger children, a boy and a girl who looked to be around 7 or 8, stared at me with solemn expressions that made me slightly uncomfortable. As we walked, the old man explained they were returning home after visiting his wife's sister. They lived in a city about 3 hours away by train. The conversation was pleasant enough, but something felt off. They didn't ask me any questions about myself, which is unusual when you meet someone in the middle of the night. And the children never spoke, not once during the entire walk. It took us about an hour to reach the station. The whole time, we barely passed a soul, just one police car that cruised by without stopping. When we finally arrived, I was shocked to see the station completely dark and deserted. There should have been at least a few staff around, even at that hour, but there was no one. "Which platform do you need?" I asked, feeling a strange uneasiness growing in my stomach. "Oh, we know our way," the elderly woman said, taking the suitcase from me. "Thank you for your help, dear." "Yes, thank you," the old man added. "You should get some rest now. You look tired." I nodded, suddenly desperate to get to my room. "Well, good night then. Safe travels." They smiled and nodded, and I watched as they walked toward the platforms with their silent children. Something about the way they moved made me shiver. Too smooth, too coordinated. I turned away and hurried to my staff room, locking the door behind me. I collapsed onto the small bed without even taking off my shoes, suddenly overcome with exhaustion. Despite my craving for cigarettes, I fell asleep almost instantly. When I woke up, it was 5:30 in the morning, and the station was bustling with its usual activity. I washed my face, changed into fresh clothes, and headed out, determined to finally get those cigarettes. To my surprise, there were several shops open near the station, including a small convenience store and a newsagent. I bought a pack of cigarettes from the convenience store and casually mentioned to the middle-aged woman behind the counter how frustrating it had been not finding any open shops the night before. She looked at me strangely. "What are you talking about? We're open until 2 in the morning every night, have been for years. This is a junction station. We get passengers at all hours." I felt my blood run cold, but I walked all over town last night. Every shop was closed. She shook her head. "That's impossible. There's at least 5 shops within walking distance of the station that stay open late. The petrol station on Cork Street is open 24 hours. I tried to argue, but she was adamant. I left feeling disoriented and confused. Had I somehow missed every open shop? Had I been walking in circles without realizing it? I went to the platform supervisor's office to check the train schedule from the night before. I wanted to see if there had been a 3:45 train that the elderly couple could have been catching. No trains between 1 and 5 in the morning, the supervisor told me after checking the system. Never are on that line. First train out is the 5:15 to Manchester. I thanked him and walked away, my mind racing. Who were those people? Where had they gone? I went to the platform where they would have caught their supposed train, but there was no sign they had ever been there. As I stood there smoking my hard-won cigarette, my phone rang. It was my father. "Son," he said, his voice breaking. "I've got bad news. Raj died last night. Heart attack. They found him this morning." The cigarette fell from my fingers. Raj had been my best friend since childhood. We'd grown up together, gone to school together. He was only 34, like me. The last time we'd spoken, about a month earlier, he'd been trying to get me to quit smoking. He'd always hated my habit, even joining an anti-tobacco NGO a few years back. "When?" I managed to ask. "Doctors think it happened around 2 in the morning. 2 in the morning. Exactly when I'd met the elderly couple. I've replayed that night in my head countless times since then. The elderly couple who appeared out of nowhere in an empty town. The silent children. The way all the shops that should have been open weren't. The inexplicable hours I spent walking without finding my way back to the station. Sometimes I think Raj somehow kept me from smoking that night, his last act of friendship from beyond. Other times I wonder if those people were even real, or if I experienced some kind of breakdown from stress and exhaustion. All I know for certain is that I haven't touched a cigarette since that night, and sometimes when I'm working the late shift and arrive at Millfield Junction, I think I catch glimpses of an elderly couple with 3 children waiting on a platform where no train is scheduled to arrive. But when I look again, they're always gone. Story 18. I've been putting off writing this for weeks now because honestly, I'm still trying to process what happened. I work as a medical examiner in Milwaukee, and I've seen all kinds of horrible things in my career, but nothing has ever followed me home. At least that's what I thought until 2 weekends ago. First, I should explain that my 5-year-old son Tim has a condition that requires constant monitoring. His immune system is compromised, and he gets sick easily. My husband Mark and I have been taking shifts watching him, especially at night when his breathing sometimes becomes irregular. We installed a high-quality baby monitor in his room, even though he's not a baby anymore, just so we can keep an eye on him when we're not physically present. Anyway, that Friday I was swamped with paperwork at the morgue. I stayed late to finish everything because I wanted the whole weekend free to be with Tim. My colleague Emma offered to help, but I told her to go home to her family. It was already dark when I finally left work around 8:30 in the evening. The morgue is always creepy at night, but that night felt different. The fluorescent lights were buzzing more than usual, and I kept feeling like someone was watching me. I've worked there for 7 years, so I'm used to being alone with the deceased, but something felt off. As I was locking up, I swear I heard what sounded like a child giggling down the hallway near the cold storage. I called out, thinking maybe the janitor's kid was there, but nobody answered. I was exhausted and figured my mind was playing tricks on me. When I got home, Mark had already put Tim to bed. I went to check on him like I always do, but when I reached his room, his door was open. This immediately struck me as weird because we have a child safety guard on his door, the kind that prevents little kids from opening doors. Tim can't reach it, let alone operate it, but there was his door wide open. I peeked inside and saw Tim sleeping peacefully in his car-shaped bed. His nightlight cast a soft blue glow around the room. Everything seemed normal. I kissed his forehead gently, tucked his blanket around him, and closed the door. When I mentioned the open door to Mark, he swore he had closed it after putting Tim to bed. We just figured Tim must have somehow managed to open it himself before falling back asleep. We were both too tired to think much of it. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to Tim screaming. He came running into our bedroom, sobbing uncontrollably. His whole body was shaking as he climbed into our bed. Mark turned on the lamp while I tried to calm Tim down. His face was pale, and he was hyperventilating. "There's a man in my room," he cried, burying his face in my chest. Mark immediately got up to check, grabbing the baseball bat we keep under the bed. I stayed with Tim, trying to soothe him while my heart raced. A few minutes later, Mark came back and said there was nobody in the room or anywhere else in the house. All the doors and windows were locked. "He probably had a nightmare," Mark whispered to me over Tim's head, but Tim was insistent. "He was there, the big man with the hat. He told me to go away." We let Tim sleep with us that night. In the morning, I remembered the baby monitor. We have one of those fancy ones that records video and audio continuously, saving footage for up to 72 hours. I pulled up the app on my phone while Mark made breakfast, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The footage from around 2:55 in the morning showed Tim sleeping peacefully. Then, his door slowly opened. The hallway light was on, casting a rectangle of light into the room. But here's the scary part. There should have been shadows if someone was standing in the doorway, but there weren't any. The door just stood open for about a minute. Then Tim suddenly sat up in bed and turned toward the door. His lips were moving like he was talking to someone, but the audio didn't pick up what he was saying. A few seconds later, his expression changed from confused to terrified. That's when he jumped out of bed and ran out of the room, screaming for us. I showed the footage to Mark, and he had no explanation. We asked Tim again about what happened, trying to be casual so we wouldn't scare him more. "The big man with the hat and glowing eyes was standing at my door," Tim said while pushing his cereal around with his spoon. "He told me this was his house now and I had to go away." "What did the man look like, buddy?" Mark asked, trying to sound calm. Tim looked up at us with those innocent eyes. He was really tall and black, but not like people black, like shadow black, and he had a big hat like the ones in old movies, and his eyes were glowing yellow. He went back to his cereal like what he'd just described was perfectly normal. I felt sick to my stomach. I've read about something called the Hat Man, a shadowy figure wearing a wide-brimmed hat that people have reported seeing during sleep paralysis or paranormal encounters. But Tim had never heard of such a thing. He doesn't watch scary movies, and we're careful about what he sees online. Since that night, weird things have been happening around the house. Doors that we're sure we closed are found open. Items get moved from where we left them. Tim's toys will be arranged differently when we come back into a room. At first I thought maybe Tim was doing it, but some of these things happen when he's napping or right in front of us. The most disturbing development is that Tim has started talking about his little girlfriend who plays with him when we're not looking. He describes her as having long black hair and a white dress. Again, not something from any shows or books he's familiar with. She's sad because she can't find her mommy. Tim told me yesterday while we were drawing at the kitchen table. She says the Hat Man brought her here. I've been trying to rationalize everything. Maybe Tim is developing an imaginary friend to cope with his illness. Maybe Mark and I are so sleep-deprived that we're forgetting where we put things. Maybe the door has a faulty latch. But then I remember that video. The door opening with no visible person, Tim clearly speaking to someone who wasn't there, and then that look of pure terror on his face. Last night, I woke up around 2 in the morning feeling like someone was watching me. When I opened my eyes, I saw a tall, dark silhouette standing at the foot of our bed. It was wearing what looked like a wide-brimmed hat. I couldn't move or scream. My body was completely frozen. The figure just stood there for what felt like eternity, and then it slowly turned and walked through our closed bedroom door. Not opened it, went through it. I managed to wake Mark up, but by then, whatever I saw was gone. He thinks I was having a hypnagogic hallucination, that thing where you're half asleep and think you see something. But I know what I saw. I can't help thinking that something followed me home from the morgue. We deal with death every day in my job. We handle the bodies of people who died in all kinds of ways. Natural causes, accidents, suicides, murders. Some of them are children. What if something attached itself to me? What if it's not just one entity but two? This Hat Man and the little girl Tim talks about. I reached out to Emma from work, and she told me about research she'd done on this Hat Man phenomenon. Apparently, people all over the world have reported seeing the same figure. A tall shadow person wearing a hat with glowing eyes. Some believe it's a type of interdimensional being that feeds on fear. Others think it's a demon or some kind of harbinger of bad things to come. I'm not religious or superstitious. I'm a medical examiner, for God's sake. I deal in facts and evidence, but I can't explain what's happening in my house. Today, I came home from grocery shopping to find all of Tim's stuffed animals arranged in a circle in the middle of his room. Mark was in the shower, and Tim was napping in our bed. No one else was home. I'm writing this now because I don't know what else to do. Mark thinks we should see a family therapist, that maybe Tim is acting out because of his illness, and our stress is making us paranoid. Maybe he's right, but the look on Tim's face when he talks about the Hat Man, that's real fear. I'm considering taking time off work. Maybe whatever this is will go away if I'm not constantly around death. I've started researching cleansing rituals and protection methods from different cultures. I don't believe in most of it, but I'm desperate. For now, Tim sleeps in our room. I've started leaving lights on throughout the house at night. Mark thinks I'm overreacting, but he didn't see what I saw. He didn't feel the cold dread that washed over me when that shadow figure stood at the foot of our bed. I don't know if writing this has helped. I still don't have answers. But I know what I saw, what Tim saw, and what the baby monitor recorded. Something is in our house, something that wears a hat and has glowing eyes, and I think it wants us gone. If anyone has experienced anything similar or has any advice, please let me know. I'm running out of logical explanations, and I'm terrified for my family, especially for Tim. Whatever this thing is, I can't let it hurt my little boy. Story 19. I've never told this story to anyone outside of my immediate family because I still can't explain what happened. Even typing this makes my hands shake. This was almost 2 years ago when I was 16, but I remember every single detail like it happened last night. My girlfriend Lily was staying over at my house. We'd been dating for about 8 months at that point, and my parents were cool with her sleeping over on weekends. It was summer break, so we'd stayed up late watching horror movies. Ironic, I know, and finally crashed around 1 in the morning. Everything was totally normal when we went to bed. Our cat Milo was curled up at the foot of the bed like always. My room isn't anything special, just a queen-sized bed against the wall, so I always sleep on the outside edge, and Lily takes the wall side. We have this thing where we fall asleep holding hands, but eventually drift apart during the night. I remember I was the little spoon that night, with Lily's arm around my waist, but by the time we woke up, we were on opposite sides of the bed. I'm not sure what woke me up first, Lily's scream or the movement of her jolting upright. My bedside clock read 3:21 a.m. when I opened my eyes. At first, I thought she was having a nightmare, but when I turned on my lamp, I realized something was seriously wrong. "My head," she was saying, clutching the side of her face. "Something scratched me. It hurts so bad." I was still half asleep, but the panic in her voice snapped me awake immediately. When she pulled her hand away, I saw blood on her fingers. Not a lot, but enough to make my stomach drop. "What happened?" I asked, fully sitting up now. "I don't know," she said, voice shaking. I was completely asleep, and then it felt like something slashed at my face. It stung so bad it woke me up. I leaned in closer to look, and what I saw still gives me chills. There was a deep scratch running from her right eyebrow up into her hairline. It wasn't like a little scrape. This was a proper cut, like someone had taken a razor and dragged it across her skin. The edges were clean, and it was bleeding enough that I had to grab tissues from my nightstand to dab at it. "Did you scratch yourself in your sleep?" I asked, trying to find a logical explanation. She shook her head. "My nails are way too short," she said, showing me her hands. She always kept her nails trimmed super short because she played guitar. There's no way her stubby nails could have made that kind of mark. That's when we noticed her hand. There was another scratch across her right hand, extending from her thumb all the way to her wrist. This one looked even deeper than the one on her face. It was so precise, like a surgeon had made it with a scalpel. "Sophia, what's happening?" she whispered, and the fear in her voice made my blood run cold. I turned on my overhead light to get a better look, and that's when we saw more. There was dried blood around her nose, not a lot, but definitely there, and on her forehead, right at the hairline, were what looked like tiny puncture marks, like someone had pressed the tines of a fork against her skin. We both started freaking out. I mean, what the hell could have caused these injuries? I checked her side of the bed, lifting the pillows and sheets, looking for anything sharp that could have done this. Nothing. Not a single thing that could explain what had happened. "Were you having a nightmare?" I asked. "Maybe you scratched yourself without realizing." "I wasn't dreaming at all," she insisted. "And I didn't wake up and then notice these. The pain of getting scratched is what woke me up. I literally felt something drag across my skin." That detail still haunts me. She didn't wake up and discover the scratches. The act of being scratched is what jolted her awake. Whatever did this happened while she was asleep. I checked my own hands and nails, even though I knew I couldn't have done it. I was sleeping on the complete opposite side of the bed, and I always tuck both hands under my pillow when I sleep. Plus, I'm not exactly the type to violently attack someone in my sleep without waking myself up. "What about Milo?" she asked, looking at our cat, who was still curled up at the foot of the bed on my side, looking completely unbothered. "He's been on my side the whole time," I said, "and he's never scratched anyone in his life." Milo was this super gentle, lazy orange tabby who barely had the energy to chase a toy, let alone attack someone. Plus, cat scratches looked nothing like what was on Lily's face and hand. The scratch on her face was particularly disturbing. When I cleaned it with a damp cloth, I noticed something even weirder. There was a small skip in the middle of the cut, as if whatever had made it had momentarily lifted before continuing the slash, like if you're drawing a line with a pen and you briefly lift it in the middle before continuing. What kind of accident could cause that? We spent the next hour trying to come up with rational explanations. Maybe something sharp was stuck to the wall. Nope, the wall was smooth. Could it have been her earring? She wasn't wearing any. What about a loose spring in the mattress? We checked the entire bed. Nothing. By 4:30 in the morning, we were both sitting cross-legged on my bed, the lights fully on, completely freaked out. The scratches weren't bleeding anymore, but they were angry red lines that looked like they'd leave scars. "I don't want to go back to sleep," Lily whispered. I didn't either, but I tried to be brave. "It had to be something logical," I said, not believing my own words. "Maybe you had a weird reaction to something, or maybe you sleepwalked and hurt yourself without realizing." But the way the scratches looked, they weren't self-inflicted. They looked like someone, or something, had deliberately slashed at her. "I think we should switch sides," Lily suddenly said. "If it happens again, maybe it'll happen to whoever sleeps on that side." I didn't want to admit what we were both thinking, that maybe something supernatural had attacked her. We're both pretty rational people. But when you've eliminated every possible explanation, what's left? Okay, I agreed, though the thought of sleeping on the side where she'd just been attacked made my skin crawl. Let's switch. We moved our pillows to opposite sides, and I took the spot against the wall. Neither of us said it out loud, but we were both conducting an experiment. If whatever happened was tied to the location rather than to Lily specifically, then I might be the next target. We left the small bedside lamp on and tried to go back to sleep, but I don't think either of us actually did. I kept staring at the ceiling, listening to Lily's breathing, wondering what the hell had happened. Every time she shifted or made a small noise, I'd jolt fully awake, afraid she was being attacked again. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the sun finally started to filter through my curtains around 6, I felt a tiny bit of relief. Whatever had happened seemed confined to the darkness. In the light of day, the scratches looked even worse. The one on her face was a clear, straight line that couldn't possibly have been self-inflicted. The one on her hand had already started to scab over, but it was deep enough that I was worried about infection. My mom freaked out when she saw Lily at breakfast. "What happened to your face?" she asked, immediately going into mom mode and examining the wound. Lily and I exchanged looks. "I'm not sure," Lily said carefully. "I woke up with it." My mom didn't believe that for a second. "Scratches like that don't just appear, Lily. Did something happen? Did you two have a fight?" She looked between us suspiciously. "No, Mom, of course not," I said, feeling sick that she could even suggest I might have hurt Lily. "We were both asleep, and she woke up with these scratches. We have no idea how they got there." My mom looked skeptical, but dropped it after checking to make sure the wounds were clean. She suggested Lily might want to see a doctor if they didn't start healing properly. The rest of the day was tense. Lily stayed over again that night because neither of us wanted to be alone, but we were both terrified of going to sleep. We kept the lights on all night and barely closed our eyes. Nothing happened the second night or the third. Eventually, the scratches healed, leaving faint scars that have faded over time. We never switched back to our original sleeping positions, though. To this day, whenever Lily stays over, I take the wall side and she sleeps on the edge. We've tried to rationalize what happened that night. Maybe there was something sharp hidden in the bedding that we missed. Maybe Lily had some kind of bizarre sleepwalking episode. Maybe I did something in my sleep that I have no memory of, though that seems impossible given where I was in the bed. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my room, I think about how Lily described being woken up, the feeling of something deliberately dragging across her skin, the precision of those cuts, the fact that nothing in that room could have caused those injuries, and I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't woken up when we did. If whatever made those marks had continued, if it had gone for her throat instead of her face. I still sleep with a nightlight. I still check my bed for anything sharp before I lie down. And sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I feel the lightest pressure against my skin, like something testing to see if I'm really asleep. Maybe there's a perfectly logical explanation for what happened that night, but it's been almost 2 years, and we still haven't found it. Story 20. I still can't believe I'm finally writing this down. For years, my family has dealt with this situation privately, but after what happened last month, I need outside perspectives. I'm not even sure if posting this will help, but I'm desperate for some insight from people who might understand. Our house in Northumberland has been in our family for generations. It's this old Victorian place with creaky floorboards and drafty windows. Pretty typical for the British countryside, honestly. It's the kind of house that makes weird noises naturally, so when things first started happening, we brushed them off. The first incident happened about 15 years ago when I was barely 1 year old. My mum was away on a business trip to Glasgow. She used to travel a lot for pharmaceutical sales back then. Dad was home alone with me and my sister Emma. She was 4 at the time. Dad doesn't talk about that night much, but he's told the story enough times that I know exactly what happened. He woke up around 3 in the morning with that feeling someone was watching him. When he opened his eyes, there was an elderly man sitting in the rocking chair in the corner of their bedroom. The man was just sitting there. Dad described him as thin, wearing what looked like clothes from another era, not quite Victorian but definitely old-fashioned. Grey hair, deeply lined face. The worst part, according to Dad, was that the man wasn't doing anything threatening, just sitting there watching. Dad said he nearly had a heart attack. He jumped out of bed, grabbed me from my crib in the nursery, then got Emma from her room and rushed us all downstairs. He spent the rest of the night on the sofa with us, too terrified to go back upstairs. When morning came, he finally got the courage to check the bedroom again. The man was gone. Dad convinced himself it was just a vivid dream or sleep paralysis. He didn't tell Mum when she got back because he didn't want to scare her. Our house is pretty isolated, and he didn't want her feeling unsafe when he had to travel for work. But then, about 3 months later, Mum had her own experience. Dad was away at a conference in Manchester, and it was just Mum with Emma and me. Mum woke up around the same time, 3 in the morning. At first she thought she heard me crying, but then realized there was someone in the room. She opened her eyes and saw an elderly man, the same elderly man, though she didn't know that yet, leaning over her bed, not touching her, just looking down at her. Mum completely lost it. She screamed, scrambled out of bed, grabbed Emma and me, and ran straight out of the house in her nightgown. She didn't even put on shoes. We lived about half a mile from our nearest neighbors, the Millers, and she ran the whole way carrying me and dragging Emma along. Mrs. Miller let us in, and Mum called Dad in hysterics. That's when Dad finally told her about his experience. They were both properly freaked out. After that night, my parents had the house checked for intruders, changed all the locks, and even had a security system installed. The police found no evidence of a break-in. Nothing was taken. There were no footprints outside despite the muddy garden, no signs of forced entry. The weird thing is, after those 2 incidents, everything went quiet for years. My parents eventually chalked it up to some weird shared hallucination or something. We still lived in the house. It's been in Dad's family for generations, and despite those experiences, we all loved it there. It's home. I grew up hearing these stories, but they felt distant, like something that happened to different people in a different house. I never experienced anything myself, and neither did Emma. Life was completely normal for over a decade, until last Christmas. I'm 16 now, and Emma's 19 and home from university for the holidays. Mum and Dad divorced when I was 10, and Mum remarried Jeff 3 years ago. Dad moved to Edinburgh, so it's just been Mum, Jeff and me in the house, with Emma visiting during breaks. It started with small things. We put up the Christmas tree in the front room like always, and the next morning, several ornaments were on the floor. We assumed our cat Pepper had been messing around, so we just put them back up. But it kept happening. Every morning, more ornaments on the floor. Then one evening, when we were all watching a movie in the lounge, we heard a crash from the front room. The entire tree had fallen over. No windows were open, Pepper was asleep on Emma's lap, and no one had been near it. Jeff helped us set it up again, checking that it was properly balanced. 2 days later, it happened again. Then again. After the 3rd time, Jeff anchored the tree to the wall with some fishing line. It still fell. The night before Christmas Eve, we were all in bed when we heard a massive bang from the hallway. Mum and Jeff ran out to check, and the loft hatch, the entrance to our attic, was wide open, the fold-down ladder fully extended. Jeff had been up there earlier that day to get some presents he'd hidden, but he swore he'd closed it properly. He's meticulous about things like that. The strange part was that the loft hatch requires you to push it up and then slide it to the side. It can't just fall open, and the ladder doesn't extend automatically. You have to pull it down. Someone, or something, had deliberately opened it. We had a tense Christmas, trying to act normal, but all jumping at every noise. After the holidays, things calmed down again, and we convinced ourselves it was just the old house settling or something equally rational. Then, about 2 months ago, the incident started again, but different this time. More deliberate. Mum keeps a framed photo of her and Jeff from their wedding on her bedside table. One morning she woke up and found it placed face down, not knocked over, carefully placed upside down. She assumed Jeff had moved it for some reason, but he denied touching it. A week later, Emma, who was visiting for the weekend, found all 6 vinyl album covers on her shelf turned upside down. These weren't just random albums. They were all love songs or romantic artists. She keeps them arranged by color, and she's particular about how they're displayed, so she immediately noticed. The following day, I found an old framed poem in the guest room, a love poem that had belonged to my grandmother, also turned upside down on the wall. Again, not fallen, but deliberately inverted. Everything that's been turned upside down has some connection to love or relationships. Mum and Jeff's wedding photo, Emma's romantic album collection, Grandma's love poem. Last month is when things escalated to the point where I'm finally writing this. It was a Tuesday night, and I was up late finishing an essay. Everyone else was asleep. Around 2 in the morning, I went downstairs to make a cup of tea. As I passed the front room, I noticed the temperature dropped dramatically. It was April, but it suddenly felt like December. I glanced into the room and froze. There was an elderly man sitting in Dad's old armchair, the one we keep by the fireplace even though Dad doesn't live here anymore. The man matched the description perfectly. Thin, old-fashioned clothes, gray hair, deeply lined face. He didn't look threatening. He just looked sad, unbearably sad. He was staring at the mantelpiece where we keep family photos. For some reason, I wasn't scared in that moment, just confused and curious. I actually took a step into the room. That's when he turned and looked at me. His eyes were so empty, not evil, just hollow, like someone who had lost everything. He didn't speak or move toward me. He just looked at me with those empty eyes, and then he pointed to the wedding photo of Mum and Jeff on the mantelpiece. I blinked, and he was gone. The room immediately felt warmer. The next morning, that wedding photo was upside down. Since then, I've been researching the history of our house. I discovered that in the late 1800s, the original owner's wife left him for another man. According to local records, the husband never recovered from the heartbreak and died alone in the house. I haven't told Mum or Jeff what I saw. Emma knows. She's the only one I've told, but she thinks I was just tired and imagining things based on the stories we grew up hearing. But I know what I saw, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever, whoever is in our house is fixated on relationships and heartbreak. Is it trying to warn us about something? Is Jeff going to leave Mum, or is it angry about Mum remarrying after divorcing Dad? The activity has been increasing over the past few weeks. More items related to love or relationships found upside down. The temperature drops randomly in different rooms. Last night, I woke up at exactly 3 in the morning, feeling like someone was watching me. I didn't see anyone, but my bedroom door, which I always close before sleeping, was wide open. I don't know what to do. Mum loves this house and would never consider moving. Jeff thinks we're all being dramatic about old house noises. Emma's back at university and doesn't have to deal with this daily. And me, I'm sleeping with my lights on for the first time since I was 8 years old. Story 21. I still don't know exactly what happened to me last week. I'm posting this from a motel in Cedar City, where I've been staying since I finally made it back to civilization. The staff are getting concerned because I refuse to leave my room except for absolute necessities. I haven't slept more than a couple hours at a time. Every time I close my eyes, I see them watching me. I've always been a solo traveler. Something about being alone on the open road just feels right to me. After a particularly rough few months at work in San Francisco, I decided to take some time off for a road trip through Utah's national parks. I had my Toyota 4Runner packed with camping gear, hiking supplies, and enough food for a week of adventuring. The first couple days were exactly what I needed. Stunning views, peaceful hikes, and that sense of smallness you get when surrounded by nature. On the third day, I was crossing through Nevada, planning to hit Zion the following morning. The sunset was painting the desert in these incredible oranges and reds. I had my window down, feeling the warm air rush in, some folk rock playing on my speakers. I was completely relaxed for the first time in months. That's when I saw it, a weathered wooden sign on the side of the highway reading Fresno Road, shortcut to I-15. I slowed down, checking my GPS. It didn't show any road there, but GPS isn't always reliable in remote areas. I had a paper map in my glove compartment, but I didn't bother checking it. The sign said it was a shortcut, and I figured it might save me an hour or so. Plus, I was feeling adventurous. I made the turn onto what started as cracked asphalt. It wasn't great, but I'd driven on worse. My 4Runner could handle it. The road cut through these weird rock formations that I hadn't seen elsewhere in Nevada, almost like melted candle wax, but on a massive scale. I remember thinking they'd make for some cool photos on the way back. As the sun continued to set, the landscape got increasingly barren, just flat desert stretching to the horizon, with those strange rock formations appearing less frequently. I kept driving, expecting to hit I-15 any minute. But after about an hour, I realized something wasn't right. According to my calculations, I should have reached the interstate already. I checked my phone, no signal. My GPS was just showing me in the middle of nowhere, with no roads marked at all. I wasn't too worried yet, though. The road I was on had narrowed to basically a dirt path, but it was still clearly used by vehicles. I figured it had to lead somewhere. By the time full darkness hit, I'd been on this road for over 2 hours. Now I was getting concerned. I considered turning back, but I'd come so far that it seemed more logical to continue forward. The headlights of my 4Runner cut through the darkness, illuminating just enough of the path ahead. The temperature had dropped significantly, and I'd rolled up my window, turning the heater on low. I was just about to stop and set up camp for the night when I saw lights in the distance. Relief washed over me. Civilization. I sped up slightly, eager to find out where I was and how to get back to the main highway. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a town or even a gas station. It was just a cluster of houses, maybe 10 or 15 of them, arranged along what passed for a main street. Even in the darkness, I could tell the place was abandoned. There were no cars, no lights in windows, just these houses illuminated by my headlights. I slowed to a crawl, my unease growing. Something was wrong with these houses. At first, I couldn't place it. They were simple wooden structures, the kind you might find in any old western ghost town. But as I drove past the first few, I realized what was bothering me. The angles were all wrong. It's hard to explain, but the houses looked like they were built by someone who didn't understand how buildings should work. Walls leaned at impossible angles without collapsing. Windows were placed in asymmetrical patterns that hurt my eyes to look at, and on every door and many of the walls were symbols painted in what looked like dark red paint. Not graffiti, these looked ancient, like something you'd see in cave paintings, but more complex, more deliberate. I didn't stop to investigate. Every instinct was telling me to keep moving. I was halfway through this ghost town when my headlights illuminated something in the middle of the road ahead. It was a figure. A person, I thought at first. But as I got closer, I realized this was no human. It was tall, impossibly tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, and unnaturally thin. Its limbs were elongated, arms hanging down past its knees. Its skin was pale to the point of being translucent. I swear I could see dark shapes moving beneath the surface. But its eyes, God, its eyes were completely black, like holes punched into reality. I hit the brakes, stopping about 30 feet from this thing. For several seconds, we just stared at each other. Then it smiled. Its mouth opened wider than any human mouth could, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. I panicked. I slammed my foot on the gas and swerved around it, nearly hitting one of the crooked houses. In my rearview mirror, I could see it turning to watch me go, that terrible smile still on its face. It didn't chase me, but somehow that was worse. I drove like hell, putting as much distance between me and that thing as possible. The road continued past the ghost town, winding through more desert. I must have driven for another hour, my heart pounding the entire time before I started to calm down slightly. I told myself I had hallucinated the whole thing. Stress, exhaustion, and the weird rock formations playing tricks on my mind in the darkness. Then I saw another cluster of lights ahead. At first, I was relieved, maybe an actual town this time. But as I got closer, my blood went cold. It was the same ghost town, the exact same one. I recognized the pattern of houses, the weird angles, even specific symbols painted on the doors. Somehow, I had looped back to where I'd been before. That was impossible. I hadn't turned around. I hadn't made any turns at all. Just followed the road straight ahead. Yet here I was, back at the beginning. I slowed down, trying to make sense of what was happening. Had I somehow gotten turned around in the dark? No, I was certain I hadn't. The road didn't have any forks or branches that I'd seen, just a straight path through the desert. As I approached the spot where I'd seen the tall figure before, I braced myself, but there was nothing there this time. I accelerated, determined to get through the town quickly. On the other side, I kept driving, hoping that somehow I'd break free of whatever loop I seemed to be caught in. But after another hour, I saw lights ahead again, the same town, a third time. That's when true panic set in. I stopped the car and got out, needing to clear my head. The desert night was cold and silent, unnaturally silent. No insects, no wind, nothing, just absolute stillness. I looked up at the stars, hoping to orient myself, but the constellations looked wrong. Unfamiliar patterns, stars where they shouldn't be. I got back in my car and tried to think rationally. I decided to drive off the road entirely, cutting across the desert. Maybe I could break free of the loop that way. I put my 4Runner in 4-wheel drive and veered off into the sand. I drove for maybe 15 minutes before realizing the road had completely disappeared. Not just behind me, it was gone in all directions. Just flat, featureless desert as far as my headlights could reach. I stopped again, truly frightened now. That's when I noticed something on the horizon. The first hint of dawn was breaking, and in that faint light, I could see figures standing in the distance, dozens of them forming a circle around me. They were too far away to make out clearly, but I knew instinctively they were like the tall thing I'd seen in the town. I tried to start my car, but the engine wouldn't turn over. I tried again and again, panic rising in my throat. On the 6th try, it finally caught, and I floored it, heading for what seemed like a gap between two of the distant figures. As I drove, the sun continued to rise, and I could see more clearly. The watchers remained at the edges of my vision, always maintaining their distance but never disappearing. They were following me, keeping pace effortlessly despite my speed. I drove all day. My gas gauge dropped lower and lower. The landscape never changed, just flat desert in all directions. No roads, no landmarks, nothing. Just me and the watchers on the horizon. By midday, I noticed they were closer than before. Not by much, but enough that I could make out more details. They varied in height and shape, but all had those same black eyes, that same translucent skin with things moving underneath. I kept driving, changing directions randomly, hoping to find a way out. My water was running low. I rationed it carefully, taking small sips just to keep my mouth from getting too dry. I ate a protein bar, but I couldn't taste it. As the second night fell, I realized the watchers had moved closer again. They were maybe half a mile away now, forming a perfect circle around me. I could see them more clearly in my headlights when I turned. Those elongated limbs, those terrible smiles. I drove through the night, fueled by fear and adrenaline. When dawn broke again, I was running on fumes, both my car and myself. The gas light had been on for hours. I knew I didn't have much time left. That's when I saw it. A road. A proper asphalt road cutting through the desert. I nearly cried with relief, turning onto it and pressing the gas pedal to the floor. The watchers seemed to recede as I drove on this road, getting further away with each mile. The road eventually connected to a larger highway. Signs for Cedar City, civilization, people. My car sputtered and died just as I reached the outskirts of town. I coasted into a gas station on momentum alone. The attendant looked at me strangely as I filled up my tank with shaking hands. I must have looked terrible, unshaven, wild-eyed, dehydrated. He asked if I was okay and I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I've been in this motel for 5 days now. I've checked maps. There is no Fresno Road anywhere in Nevada. The rock formations I described don't exist. According to my phone's GPS history, I disappeared off the grid for 3 days. 3 days that felt like an eternity in that desert. I keep the curtains closed because sometimes when I look out the window I see them in the distance, watching, waiting, and I know with absolute certainty that they're getting closer. Story 22. I've never told this story publicly before. It's been almost 2 years, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I'm not sure if writing this will help me process what happened, but maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not going crazy. I live in Harborview, this small coastal town where nothing ever happens. Everyone knows everyone, and the biggest drama is usually when someone parks in front of someone else's house. It's the kind of place where fog rolls in every morning and the salt air sticks to everything. Roy moved here about 5 years ago. We became friends after meeting at the local bookstore where I worked part-time. He was this really gentle soul, always bringing me coffee on cold mornings and stopping by just to chat about whatever book he was reading. He lived alone in this little blue house with white trim right next to Oakwood Park, the kind of place with those old-fashioned French doors that lead straight into the bedroom because the house was so small. What happened started on a Wednesday morning in January. It was one of those bitter cold mornings where frost covers everything. I remember because I had to scrape my windshield the night before, and my fingers were still raw. I went to bed around 11, nothing unusual. My boyfriend Mark was snoring lightly beside me. I drifted off quickly, but what came next wasn't like any dream I've ever had. Suddenly I was in Roy's bedroom, not like I'd walked in, more like I was just there, floating kind of. I could see everything with perfect clarity. The peeling blue paint on his walls, the stack of paperbacks on his nightstand, his red flannel sheets, the black lighter on the hardwood floor next to his bed. Roy was lying there on his back, and the weirdest part was, he knew I was there. He looked directly at me, not surprised at all to see me hovering near the ceiling. His eyes followed me as I moved around the room. He gestured toward the floor, pointing at the black lighter that had fallen. I somehow understood he wanted me to hand it to him. I tried to reach for it, but my hand just passed through it. It was the strangest sensation. I wasn't solid. I was just consciousness. "I can't pick it up, Roy," I said. "I'm not really here." He nodded like he understood. Then he tried to reach for it himself, but something was wrong. The entire left side of his body wouldn't move. He struggled, his right arm flailing slightly while his left remained completely still against the sheets. After a few attempts, he gave up. Roy looked back up at me, his eyes focused intensely on mine. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words came out garbled. I couldn't understand what he was trying to say. His lips moved, but the sounds weren't making sense. His face showed pure frustration, like he desperately needed to tell me something important. As he struggled to communicate, his image started to fade, not like he was leaving, like I was. The room grew dimmer. Roy's face became blurry. I tried to stay, tried to understand what he was saying, but I felt myself being pulled away. I woke up with a gasp at 6:32 exactly. I remember because the red numbers on my alarm clock were the first thing I saw. My heart was pounding, and I was covered in sweat despite the cold. Mark stirred beside me. "Mark," I whispered, shaking him awake. "I think Roy just died. I watched him die in my dream." "What?" he mumbled, half asleep. It wasn't normal. It felt real. I was there with him. Mark sat up and turned on the lamp. "Ellie, it was just a nightmare. Go back to sleep." But I couldn't. I sat in the kitchen drinking tea until the sun came up, replaying every detail of the dream in my mind. I kept picking up my phone to call Roy, then putting it down. What would I even say? "Hey, just checking if you're alive because I had a weird dream." I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like I had actually been there. Around 10 that morning, I met my friend Jessica at Oakwood Park. We did this every Thursday, grabbed coffee and cinnamon rolls from the bakery, and sat on the benches watching the waves. It was freezing that day. The wind was cutting right through my coat, and the wooden bench was so cold it hurt to sit on. Jessica was telling me about some date she'd been on, but I couldn't focus. Roy's house was visible from where we sat, that little blue house with the white trim. I kept staring at it. No lights on, no movement. "Are you even listening?" Jessica asked, waving her hand in front of my face. "Sorry," I said. "I had this really disturbing dream about Roy last night." I told her everything, the floating, the lighter, Roy's paralysis, his garbled speech. As I spoke, I could see her expression changing from amusement to concern. "You think it was real?" she asked when I finished. "I don't know. It sounds crazy, right? But it wasn't like any dream I've ever had." I hesitated before saying the next part. "Jess, I need to ask you a huge favor. I think Roy might be dead, and I need you to check." "What? Ellie, come on. I know how it sounds, but I can't shake this feeling," and I took a deep breath. "I can't stand seeing dead bodies. Not since my dad. Please." Jessica stared at me for a long moment. I knew what she was thinking, that I was being ridiculous, that we'd go to Roy's house and he'd answer the door and laugh at us. "Fine," she finally said. "We'll go check on him. He's probably just sleeping in." We walked across the park to Roy's house. The grass was still crunchy with frost, and my boots left dark footprints behind us. When we reached his front door, Jessica knocked loudly. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. "See? He's probably not home," she said, but I was already moving toward the side of the house, where the French doors led into his bedroom. I knew the layout because I'd helped him move furniture once. The doors had these thin curtains, but you could still see through them if you got close enough. I pressed my face against the glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to block the glare. What I saw made my blood run cold. Roy was lying on his bed, exactly as I had seen him in my dream. Same position, same red flannel sheets, same black lighter on the floor beside the bed. "Jess," I whispered, my voice shaking. "He's in there." Jessica pushed me aside gently and looked for herself. "Is he sleeping? Should we come back?" "Try the door," I said. She turned the handle, and to our surprise, it opened. The room was warm. Roy always kept his heater cranked up high. Jessica approached the bed while I stayed frozen in the doorway. "Roy," she called softly. "Roy, wake up." She touched his shoulder, then his hand. I saw her face change. "Ellie," she said, her voice strange and tight. "Call 911, now." I fumbled with my phone, almost dropping it. My fingers were shaking so badly I could barely dial. When the dispatcher answered, I somehow managed to give them Roy's address. "My friend, he's not breathing. I think he's dead." The next hour was a blur of paramedics, police officers, and questions. So many questions. How did we know Roy? Why did we come to check on him? Had he been ill recently? I told them about my dream, immediately regretting it when I saw the looks they exchanged. But one of the paramedics, an older woman with gray hair, didn't look skeptical. She looked unsettled. "The body's been cold for hours," she told the police officer quietly. But I heard her. "Rigor mortis has set in. He's been dead since early this morning, around 5 or 6. The exact time of my dream. The coroner came and took Roy's body away. The police asked us to stay for more questions. They wanted to rule out foul play, they said, but there was nothing suspicious about the scene, just a 43-year-old man who died in his sleep. Weeks later, we got the autopsy results. Roy had died from a massive stroke. The left side of his brain had been affected, which explained why he couldn't move the right side of his body in my dream. I had it backward. The left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. It also explained why he couldn't speak properly. I've gone over that dream 1,000 times since then. What was Roy trying to tell me? Why was I there? How could I have witnessed his death while sleeping in my own bed a mile away? Sometimes I think about that black lighter on the floor. Roy didn't smoke, at least not cigarettes. He occasionally lit incense, though. Was he trying to tell me something about the lighter, or was it just random, meaningless? I don't believe in psychics or supernatural stuff, or at least I didn't before. But I watched my friend die in a dream at the exact moment he was actually dying. I saw details I couldn't possibly have known. The hardest part is the helplessness. Even if I had understood what was happening, I couldn't have saved him. Strokes can kill so quickly. By the time I realized what was happening, he was already gone. I still live in Harborview. I still walk past Roy's house almost every day. New people live there now, a young couple with a baby. They painted it yellow. Sometimes I look at those French doors and remember pressing my face against the glass, seeing exactly what I'd seen in my dream hours before. I don't know if Roy's consciousness somehow reached out to mine in his final moments. I don't know if what I experienced has a scientific explanation or if it's something beyond our understanding. All I know is that it happened, and I've never had another dream like it since. Sometimes I wonder if Roy is still trying to tell me something, if whatever message he was struggling to communicate that morning is still unfinished business. I guess I'll never know.